Ned Stark opened his eyes to darkness and the startling bite of cold. The first sensation that flooded him was not pain or fear, but an aching emptiness, a hollowness that seemed to echo deep within his chest. There was a moment, perhaps half a heartbeat, when he believed he still lay in the black cells of King's Landing, awaiting the sword that would take his head. But this darkness was not the depths of a dungeon. This darkness smelled of the north, laced with frost and pine and the faint hint of rotting leaves crushed under snow. His breath caught and a shallow, ragged gasp escaped his cracked lips. The memories whirled in frenzied loops as though carried on a harsh, icy wind spinning inside his skull, the Red Keep's courtyard, the sound of a greatsword cutting through air, a moment of clarity as he thought of his children. Then the impact and the darkness that claimed him entirely. Yet, if he had been killed, if the sharp kiss of Valyrian steel had parted his head from his body, how did he now lie on a damp patch of earth beneath a canopy of shadows? How did he feel the sting of cold on his cheeks and the hard lumps of frozen ground beneath his fingertips? He blinked. There was no question that he was alive. The wind battered the bare branches overhead and Ned could hear their tortured creaks as if the trees themselves resented the intrusion of a dead man returned to life. Slowly, painfully, he forced himself to sit. His muscles were stiff as though he had been left in the snow for days on end. The first attempt left him panting, a hazy swirl of white rising from his lips. His hair, what remained of it, felt matted with dirt and dried blood. His clothing, a rough-spun black tunic and tattered breeches, clung to his body as though they had once been soaked and had frozen to him. It occurred to him that he had no idea who had dressed him or why. The last garments he recalled wearing had been fine enough, a cloak pinned with the dire wolf sigil of House Stark, though it had felt like a funeral shroud that day in King's Landing. None of that regalia remained. He looked like a man abandoned in the wilderness with naught but the rags on his back. His heart pounded in his ears and he heard each beat resonate with the question, where am I? And how am I? But the pain in his temples made it hard to think. The world was spinning, weaving in and out. Ned planted his hand against the nearest tree trunk and used it to climb unsteadily to his feet. A wave of nausea hit him and for a terrible instant he thought he might vomit. His stomach churned emptily though nothing came up except a weak cough. The taste of copper coated his tongue. He spat, coughed again, and exhaled a trembling breath. Night had fallen. The great black dome of the sky stretched overhead, pinpricked by winking stars. A moon, barely a sliver, lent the faintest silver sheen to the land. He recognized the landscape in a dim, primal sense. The towering pines, the crooked shadows of gnarled oaks, the hush of an untouched wilderness. This had to be the gift of the old god's domain, the vastness of the north. But how far north? He lifted his gaze and noticed the distant shape of ice-laden boughs, an unbroken tundra beyond the edges of the forest. When he squinted, he thought he could see the glimmer of starlight reflecting on snowdrifts. A suspicion formed, something akin to dread. Could he be beyond the wall? He tested his legs, taking a ginger step forward. The forest seemed to protest with a low moan of wind through the branches, as if warning him to turn back, to lie down and forget. But Ned Stark was not a man to yield. If he was truly alive, by some dark or divine magic, he owed it to his family, his children, his people, to discover why he had been restored to life. And if this was a cruel trick of the gods, some half-life that would end with him wandering as a specter in the cold, then he would at least walk forward until he could walk no more. He took another step, then another, shivering in his ragged clothes. Each breath burned his lungs. The hush of snow and dead leaves beneath his boots sounded unnaturally loud in the absolute silence of the night. Perhaps hours passed, time felt unreal in the thick swirl of his confusion before he glimpsed a faint flicker of movement between the trees. It was small, fleeting, no more than a shadow slipping out of sight. Ned froze, his heart pounding. He reached reflexively for a sword that was not there. It left him feeling defenseless, naked before whatever lurked in the dark. Could it be a wild beast? A dire wolf? Or something worse? He forced himself to speak, to push his voice out of his tight throat. Who goes there? The only reply was the sigh of wind. He waited, breath misting in the cold. He thought of his beloved Winterfell, the crypts beneath the castle, the statues of the old Starks with stone wolves at their feet. He thought of his father and brother and sister. He thought of how he should have joined them in death. Yet here he stood, mouth set in a grim line as he peered into the shifting darkness, expecting an answer that never came. At length he moved on. A strange dullness settled over him. His hands and feet ached. His ears stung. He recognized the creeping edges of frostbite if he stayed too long in the cold without shelter. Instinct insisted he find cover. Beneath a massive pine, its branches forming a sort of natural canopy, he paused. The needles and snow beneath offered neither comfort nor warmth, but they were marginally better than standing exposed. He was near collapse. The ordeal of simply walking had drained what little strength he possessed. His body felt foreign. He wondered if this was truly life that he clung to or some half-animated shell. Before he surrendered to exhaustion, he cast one last glance into the dark wood. He thought he saw a shape again. A tall figure with the outline of antlers or perhaps twisted branches. It was gone in a heartbeat, a flicker of black on black. Or maybe it was his weary mind conjuring illusions. With a trembling sigh, Ned lowered himself to the ground and wrapped his arms around his chest to conserve heat. Sleep, if it could be called that, stole over him in uneasy waves, broken by fits of shivering and half-remembered nightmares. He dreamt of Caitlin, of how she had looked the last time he saw her, eyes wide with grief and fear, tears glimmering on her cheeks. He dreamt of Sansa and Arya, of the day in King's Landing when he had tried to protect them from the nightmares swirling around the throne. He dreamt of his sons, Robb, Bran, Rickon, each image shredded by recollections of his own downfall. Then came the worst memory. The blow of the sword, a flash of agony, the warmth of blood, the sense of oblivion. But the moment of death stretched away, dissolving into black water. In the dream, something reached for him in that water, pulled him to a shore he did not recognize. He saw a weirwood, leaves red as blood, its trunk carved with a solemn face. Its eyes bled sap, and the face contorted in sorrow. The breeze through its leaves sounded like a whisper. The North remembers. When he woke, stiff and half-buried in a thin layer of fallen snow, the dawn light limned the forest with a pale glow. His hands were nearly blue. Movement hurt. He had to live, or whatever living meant now. He had to find fire, shelter, and answers. Summoning all his will, he stood. The mere act made him dizzy, but after a few sways he steadied. A short distance away he spotted a narrow track, perhaps a path used by the free folk or even roving animals. With no real alternative, Ned followed that track deeper into the forest. The morning passed in a blur of breathless trudging through thick drifts, over exposed roots. He found faint traces of footprints, but they were old, half-erased by new snowfall. Once, he paused to gulp down mouthfuls of icy water at a half-frozen stream. He saw the stony shapes of fish beneath the surface and felt a pang of hunger that made his head spin. But he had no means to catch them, no spear or net, not even a dagger. Still, the cold water soothed his throat, and it jolted him awake with its sheer, frigid bite. Eventually, he emerged into a clearing ringed by jagged rocks. A curious hush lay over the place, as if it were shielded from the wind by unseen hands. In the center, he noticed a circle of old stones, blackened by soot. A campsite, he realized, though it appeared abandoned. Torn scraps of cloth clung to a root near the stones, as if someone had hastily departed. With cautious hope, Ned crouched to inspect the fire circle. Beneath a layer of ash and snow, there were still a few small pieces of wood, half-burnt. He brushed snow from one, pressed it between his stiff fingers. He had flint and steel once, but that was in his old life. Now he had nothing. His eyes scanned the ground in desperation, searching for anything that might serve as flint or any scrap of metal. The gods must have shown a shred of mercy, because after several minutes of hunting through the rocky outcropping, he found a sharp-edged stone veined with quartz. It was no true flint, but it might give a spark if he struck it right. He rifled through the ash for a piece of metal, an old buckle or a belt clip. Anything with enough hardness to create friction. At last, under a clump of wet moss, he unearthed a small iron pin, perhaps from a cloak. With a ragged exhale, he held it up. It was rusted, but beggars could not be choosers. It took him nearly an hour of fruitless scraping to produce a faint spark. The pin and the makeshift flint chipped and clattered, his numb fingers trembling so badly he almost dropped them both. Yet Ned Stark had spent time in the field as a young man. He knew the basics of survival. Bit by painstaking bit, he gathered tiny shavings of bark and the driest twigs he could find under the stones, cupping them to shield them from the wind. The first spark died in the dampness. The second fizzled on a piece of bark. He was about to collapse into despair when the third attempt caught. A timid coil of smoke rose. Ned cupped it, gently breathing, nurturing that fragile life. Fire. It was as though he had conjured warmth from the heart of winter. He placed increasingly larger twigs around the spark until flames danced and crackled over the half-burnt wood in the circle. Relief swept over him in a wave so powerful it almost brought tears to his eyes. He huddled close, letting the heat soak into his bones. The presence of fire in this unforgiving land reminded him that perhaps he was meant to survive. If the gods had truly brought him back, if there was any reason behind this miracle, it was not merely to lie down and freeze. He was still needed, still had a role to play, whatever it might be. He fed the fire until it was strong, then ventured to the edges of the clearing in search of any small game. He found tracks of rabbits, even saw one darting through the undergrowth, but it was far too quick for his bare hands. Cursing softly, he returned to the fire. Hunger gnawed at him, but that was a lesser concern compared to the cold. He sat by the flames, feeding them steadily with whatever dry fuel he could scavenge. His mind returned to the question that would not leave him. Was he truly alive? And how? The old gods, he thought, or R'hllor, the Lord of Light, favored by the Red Priestesses. He had heard tales of men resurrected by that fiery faith. But Ned had never pledged himself to R'hllor. He was a man of the North, and if there was any power he trusted, it was the nameless, ancient spirits that resided in the Weirwoods. Perhaps they had deemed his time unfinished. But why let me linger beyond the wall? He could not fathom it. The memory of that strange shape among the trees returned, stirring unease in his gut. Something was watching him. Even now he felt it, an unseen presence, an awareness in the silence. Night crept in again. The sun set early this far north, and Ned found himself reluctant to let the fire die. Gathering enough wood to keep ablaze through the night was exhausting, his arms shaking, each step a labor. In the end, he could only keep a small flame going. He wrapped his arms around his knees and waited for dawn. Sleep did not come easily, but when it did, it brought him new dreams. He saw Winterfell's courtyard, the old oak, and the training yard where he had once watched Jon and Robb practice at swords. He saw a slim figure approach, face hidden by a hood. The figure raised a hand, beckoning him forward. "Come home, Ned," the voice whispered in the wind, though he could not place who spoke. He heard the howling of wolves and the distant clang of steel. And then the dream shattered into blackness, replaced by the sting of real cold. He awoke to a startled gasp and realized his fire had nearly died. The sky was the gray color of pre-dawn, a bruise of fading stars. He sat up and his gaze flicked to the edge of the clearing. Something was definitely there this time, a tall figure wrapped in ragged furs, half hidden behind a trunk. Eyes feral or fearful peered at him through a mane of tangled hair. Ned sprang to his feet, or tried to. He rose too quickly, dizzy, and stumbled. The figure bolted, turning into a fleeting shadow among the trees. "Wait!" His voice sounded broken, hoarse from disuse. He took 2 steps forward, ignoring the protests of his stiff joints. "Please, wait." But the figure was gone, vanished into the labyrinth of pine and snow. For several moments, Ned stood there, breath pluming, uncertain if he should give chase. He had no weapon, no way to defend himself. Yet the possibility of human contact struck him with desperate hope. Perhaps they knew something. Perhaps they could guide him south, or at least warn him of dangers in this realm. In the end, he took only a few cautious steps beyond the clearing. The figure had left footprints, but they were lost amid the confusion of tracks near the tree line. He pressed on for a short distance before concluding that he would likely never catch whomever it was. The forest had swallowed them. That day he quenched the fire again and ventured north, or what he assumed was north, his sense of direction scattered. He moved slowly, always mindful of any sound or trace of life. He thought of Bran, who had climbed every wall in Winterfell and roamed about like a squirrel in the rooftops. He wondered if his second youngest son still lived, if any of them did. And Jon was with the Night's Watch. Ned could not forget that. If Jon was still alive, he might be somewhere at the wall. If Ned could reach the wall, perhaps there would be answers. But as he walked, gnawing doubts ate at him. He recalled the last he had heard. The War of the Five Kings was raging. Robb was marching south. Stannis and Renly had turned upon each other. Joffrey sat on the Iron Throne, a hateful thought if ever there was one. And the Night's Watch, he had heard rumors of growing threats beyond the wall. The White Walkers, once dismissed as legends, were said to be stirring. He looked around at the endless forest, at the shadows that seemed to deepen with each step. A memory from childhood flickered, old Nan's tales about the others, creatures with pale skin and eyes like blue stars. She spoke of them with hushed terror, how they brought with them a night that lasted a generation. He felt a shiver that had little to do with the cold. Midday found him on the edge of a wide plain of snow. In the distance rose an icy ridge that glimmered faintly beneath the pale winter sun. He approached it warily, boots crunching through a crust of ice. At the base of the ridge, he discovered a small cave entrance, half concealed by frost-laden brush. The wind was picking up, carrying with it the threat of a storm. Reluctant as he was to enter any place blindly, the thought of shelter, however meager, was too tempting to ignore. The darkness inside the cave was almost absolute, but by crouching and venturing a few steps, he found the walls were close and relatively free of dampness. He tested the floor, found it solid, if uneven. The ceiling was low enough that he had to stoop, but at least it was better than freezing under an open sky. Settling near the entrance for what meager light remained, he tried to gather enough brush and stray twigs to start another fire. But his flint stone had chipped away in the earlier attempts, and his cloak pin was worn to a nub. Each strike produced only the faintest spark. After what felt like hours of frustration, Ned slumped back, his breath ragged. He stared at the gloom of the cave and prayed silently to the old gods, to any god who would listen. He closed his eyes, exhaustion pressing in. In his mind, he repeated the names of his children, a litany to keep himself grounded. He had not been asleep for long when he jolted upright at the echo of footsteps outside. The sound was faint at first, scraping on rock, then muffled curses. Ned tensed, heart pounding. He pressed his back against the cool stone of the cave wall, peering around the edge of the entrance. A moment later, a figure appeared, stepping uncertainly toward the opening. The light was dim, but Ned glimpsed fur wrappings, a slight hunched posture, and a face obscured by grime and a ragged scarf. Ned's breath caught. It was the same figure he had seen before. The person paused just outside the cave, as if sensing eyes upon them. Ned remained perfectly still, though a tremor of anticipation coursed through him. Then, with obvious caution, the figure stepped inside, ducking a head covered in greasy, tangled hair. Through the gloom, Ned could see a pair of wide, startled eyes flick around. Clearly, the stranger had not expected to find anyone in the cave. They locked eyes. The stranger gasped, fumbling for something beneath the furs, a knife, most likely. Ned raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. He had no weapon, no desire to fight. "I mean you no harm," he said softly, voice rasping from disuse. "I'm alone." The stranger paused. A low, wary voice emerged, muffled behind the scarf. "Southron." A woman's voice, Ned realized, though rough as if seldom used. "I'm from Winterfell," he replied. A grim scoff. "That's south to me." She took a step closer, brandishing her small blade, a crude piece of sharpened metal that might once have been a dagger. "What are you doing here?" He almost laughed at the question, for he had asked himself that very thing countless times. He hesitated. The full truth sounded mad, even to his own ears. "I don't know. I woke up in the forest, battered and half-frozen. I found this cave just before the storm." Outside, the wind began to howl, as if on cue. She scowled, studying him with cold suspicion. "You're no crow. Not dressed like that. You alone?" He nodded. "I have no companions." The woman narrowed her eyes. "What's your name?" He considered lying. But what good would it do? "Ned Stark." He expected shock or recognition, but she merely shrugged. "Never heard. Oh no, Ned Stark. Doesn't matter. This is my cave. I found it first." A wave of surreal dismay washed over him. All his life, he had been Ned Stark, Lord of Winterfell, Warden of the North. Yet here, beyond the wall, among the free folk, that name meant nothing. "I'll move on," he said after a moment, forcing calm. "I only ask for a little warmth before I go." She cast a quick glance at the remains of the brush he'd tried to spark into flame. A hollow laugh echoed. "You can't even light a fire? You must be half dead." He took a slow breath. "Perhaps I am." For a heartbeat, she studied him. Then, with a reluctant grunt, she lowered the dagger. "Fine. But we keep to opposite corners. And don't try anything or I'll slit you open." Ned nodded. "Agreed." She moved past him to the deeper recesses of the cave, rummaging through a small pile of supplies he hadn't noticed before, a tightly wrapped bundle of rags, from which she produced a chunk of flint that looked more reliable than his meager piece. Within moments, she struck a spark onto a wad of dried moss and coaxed it into flame. She lit a small torch made of bound twigs dipped in animal fat, filling the cave with a wavering orange glow. Ned realized how gaunt she was, her face sallow with hunger, cheeks sunken. She looked at him with a mixture of pity and scorn. How long have you been wandering out there? She asked, pulling down her scarf to reveal a mouth pressed into a thin line. He swallowed. Days. Maybe longer. My memories are scattered. She snorted. You're lucky you didn't die. These woods are crawling with worse things than cold. He glanced at her torch, watching the shadows leap across the stone walls. You're free folk. She nodded curtly. I was. Now, I'm just trying to survive. Her gaze flicked over him again. You look half-starved. If you're gonna share my fire, share some rabbit, maybe we come to an arrangement. You help keep watch, help gather wood. I don't want a burden. He nodded, biting back the question of who she was or where she came from. I'll pull my weight. She studied him a moment longer, then moved to a rock ledge deeper in the cave where she stored a handful of meager possessions. From there, she retrieved a small dead rabbit likely snared earlier that day. A pang of hunger twisted Ned's stomach as she set about skinning it with deft, practiced movements. He watched quietly, thinking how surreal it was to be reduced to this, a resurrected lord with no name or power, humbly relying on the charity of a stranger beyond the wall. You can call me Solra, she said at last, not meeting his eyes. She wiped the blade on the rabbit's fur and began to prepare thin strips of meat for roasting. Ned nodded. Solra, he repeated. I'm grateful for your help. She merely grunted in reply. Soon, the mouth-watering smell of roasting rabbit filled the small space. Ned's stomach clenched in agonized longing. At her gesture, he reached out, taking the strip of cooked meat she offered. It burned his fingers, but he hardly cared. He ate greedily, trying to pace himself so as not to choke. Solra watched him from the corner of her eye, measuring him perhaps. She was wary but also lonely, he guessed. There were no allies to spare in the wild. Once the rabbit was finished, they let the fire burn lower, conserving the little fuel they had. Outside, the storm raged, wind shrieking across the rocks, driving needles of ice against the cave's entrance. Ned leaned back, letting the meager warmth seep into him, exhaustion settling in his bones. Memories flickered. Winterfell's great hall, family gathered around the hearth, the smell of hot bread. A wave of sorrow gripped him so strong he nearly choked. But he steeled himself, forcing the emotion away. Solra's voice cut through the hush. What's your plan, Southron? He exhaled slowly. To find the wall, or any sign of the night's watch. I have kin there. She raised a skeptical brow. You want to go back south? You'll find only crows and war. The free folk are scattering, some heading deeper north to flee the others, some trying to cross the wall. Doesn't matter. You're likely to die either way. He stared into the embers. I have to try. She considered his tone. You've lost folk. I can see it in your eyes. He nodded once, not trusting himself to speak. After a moment, she shrugged. I can't go south, not alone. But my clan, what's left of them, might be near the Frostfangs. If we can reach them, maybe we can figure a way through. They don't love crows, but if I tell them you saved my life, they might not kill you. A bitter laugh escaped Ned. You rescued me. I've done nothing for you. Solra's gaze flicked away. No, you gave me something. Company. She didn't elaborate, but in her voice, Ned heard the echo of isolation. The sense of being alone in an endless, frozen wilderness could be as lethal as a blade. He managed a faint smile of gratitude. Then I'm in your debt. They did not speak further that night. Solra doused the torch to save the fat, plunging them into near darkness punctuated by the dull glow of embers. Ned pulled his knees to his chest and tried to sleep, but his mind spun with questions. All he knew was that the next day he would wake in this cave, beyond the wall, a man who had died once before. The thought both terrified and emboldened him. Was the second chance a gift or a curse? He slipped into fitful dreams again. He saw the White Walkers, tall and silent, gliding through snowy woods. He saw the Iron Throne in a hall of ice, the swords of conquered foes shimmering like icicles. He saw his children, older and hardened by war, calling his name across a wasteland. It was a cry he could not answer. Then the face of the weirwood loomed, branches rustling in a voice like distant thunder. The North remembers. When he jerked awake, Solra was already awake, packing up her meager belongings. Thin gray light filtered through the cave's entrance. The storm's passed, she murmured. We'd best move. And so began Ned Stark's strange journey beyond the wall, accompanied by a free folk woman who had no idea she was guiding one of the 7 kingdoms most famous. albeit presumed dead lords. They trudged across frozen plains, weaving through rocky passes. The air was crisp, and the ground often treacherous with ice hidden beneath a fine layer of snow. Solra set a brisk pace, though neither of them were in great shape for long marches. Ned kept his eyes open for signs of the others. The only glimpses he caught were fleeting illusions at the edges of his vision, perhaps just the swirl of wind-blown snow. Yet an unspoken tension charged the air. The nights grew longer, colder. Sometimes Ned woke to the sound of distant howling. He prayed it was only wolves. On the fourth day, they found the remnants of a free folk camp in a sheltered valley. Dozens of footprints intermingled, crossing in frantic patterns, all heading south. Fires were long cold. Broken spears lay scattered. The smell of fear lingered, though no bodies were left behind. Solra crouched by one of the ashes, sifting through them. They ran, she muttered. Something scared them enough to pack up in a rush. Ned's gaze swept across the valley. He could almost imagine the panic that had gripped them, families hurting children, warriors urging them to hurry. The idea that entire clans were fleeing further north was madness in itself. But if the stories of the others were true, perhaps nowhere was safe. They pressed on, though neither of them spoke much. The wind did most of the talking, shrieking through the gaps in the rocks. Each day, Ned felt stronger, his limbs regaining some semblance of their old vigor. But at night, the memories plagued him, and with them came the ache of longing for Winterfell. He did not know what he would find if he returned. Likely chaos and heartbreak. But the urge to see his children burned in his chest. Even if he did not reveal himself to the lords and ladies of the realm who would believe him, he had to see his family if only from afar. He kept these thoughts to himself. Solra was a practical sort, hardened by survival. She spoke of her people, how Mance Rayder had once rallied the free folk with talk of crossing the wall to escape the coming darkness. The plans had unraveled, so she said, but still they sought ways past the Black Brothers and their watch. Ned listened, absorbing every detail, though he wondered what the Night's Watch would do if they learned Ned Stark was alive. Jon especially. The thought seized him. Jon was a brother of the Watch, sworn to hold the wall against all threats. If Ned could just find him. But would Jon even believe it was truly him? On the seventh day, the land grew more rugged, the frost fangs rising like jagged teeth on the horizon. The sun was a dull orb behind a veil of gray clouds. Solra led Ned along a narrow path that hugged the side of a steep slope, their boots slipping on icy rocks. She said her clan might have moved to a hidden valley on the far side of the mountains, a defensible position. Their progress was slow. At points, they had to crawl over sheets of ice, clinging to protruding stones lest they plunge into the crevasse below. Late in the afternoon, with the light fading, they reached a plateau. Before them stretched a basin dotted with twisted evergreens, the ground marked by frost-laden shrubs. Smoke rose from the far side, just a thin wisp against the cloudy sky. Solra pointed. That's them. Or what's left of them. Ned's heart quickened. It was the first sign of a real settlement, some semblance of community in all these days. They descended carefully, guided by the acrid scent of wood smoke. As they neared, Ned saw a scattering of crude tents and huts made from animal skins and branches. Human voices, faint but distinct, carried on the wind. Yet something felt off. A tension clung to the air. As they approached the outskirts of the camp, Ned noticed how quiet it was. No children ran about. No laughter or bustle. The wind whistled through the shabby structures. Solra pressed on, gripping her dagger, eyes wary. Ned followed, half expecting to be greeted by angry warriors. But no one emerged to challenge them. They passed a row of tents. The opening of one was torn, flapping in the breeze. Inside, Ned glimpsed an overturned cooking pot and scattered belongings. It looked as if the inhabitants had fled abruptly. Solra muttered a curse. Where in the hells are they? Before Ned could reply, a figure shuffled out from behind a hut. It was an old man, stooped with age, wearing layers of filthy fur. His face was gaunt and his eyes were milky. He stared blindly in their direction, lips trembling in a silent plea. Then, without warning, he sank to his knees, and a ragged moan escaped him. Gods, Ned whispered. Solra hurried forward, crouching next to the old man. He didn't react to her presence, only kept moaning softly. She shook him gently. What happened here? She demanded, voice rough. Where's everyone? The old man opened his mouth, and a string of drool trickled out. Then he whispered in a guttural croak, gone. They left me, took everything, something, out of the dark. His words dissolved into incoherence. He seemed delirious. Solra looked at Ned, eyes grim. He's mad with hunger or fear. Or both. She surveyed the camp, her posture tense, as if expecting attackers at any moment. Ned scanned the surroundings. He saw no bodies, no signs of bloodshed, just the unmistakable markers of rapid flight. They must have fled. Sora rose, her jaw set. I need to find if any supplies were left. We can't stay here. If something drove them off, she trailed off, glancing at the old man. We can't just leave him. Ned approached, setting a hand on the man's shoulder. Sir, he said gently, though he doubted the man could see much. We'll help you if we can. The old man's eyes flickered, focusing for a heartbeat on Ned's face. A tremor shook him. They come in the night, eyes of blue. I heard them, the children screamed. We ran, all scattered. A chill raced up Ned's spine. He had heard rumors enough about the others, about whites with glowing blue eyes. He squeezed the man's shoulder. Is that what happened here? The others came. A whimper was the only answer. Sora cursed under her breath. We can't stay. If the others truly roamed here, we're in danger. Ned's mind swirled. We have to keep moving. Get him to shelter somewhere safer. How? She gestured at the old man. He can barely walk. We have little food. Ned set his jaw. We'll do what we can. He hoisted the man's frail arm over his shoulder. Sora let out a sigh, but she helped lift him. They guided him to a slightly larger hut near the center of the camp, hoping to find some remnant of supplies. Inside, they discovered old furs, a few scattered tools, but no food aside from a meager pouch of dried beans. They started a small fire using leftover wood, lighting it with Sora's precious flint. The old man sat hunched, muttering nonsense to himself. Sora rummaged through the huts in search of anything edible, returning with only a handful of questionable dried meats and a nearly empty wineskin. Night was falling by the time they had fed the old man some of the beans, softened by water. He barely swallowed them. Outside, the wind rose, moaning like a restless spirit. Ned's thoughts turned dark. If the others were near, they might come again, especially if they sensed living souls. He tried to keep calm, reminding himself that he had lived through death once. He would not succumb easily again. They took turns at watch, though neither of them truly slept. Each time the wind changed pitch, Ned started upright, heart hammering, half expecting to see pale shapes lurking outside the hut. But the night passed without incident. By dawn, the old man's condition had worsened. His breath rattled painfully, and his skin was clammy to the touch. When Ned crouched beside him, the old man managed to croak. Don't let me become one of them. It was a plea that stabbed at Ned's heart. He had heard of whites rising in these cold lands, corpses reanimated by the White Walkers. He swallowed hard. You won't, he promised softly. The old man's eyes fluttered. For a moment he seemed to see Ned clearly. You're not like the others, he whispered. There's something your eyes. You're touched by the old gods. Be wary, Stark. Then he fell into a fitful sleep, breath hitching in his chest. Ned stared at him, stunned. The man had recognized his name after all. Or had he? Perhaps it was only delirium speaking. But the mention of the old gods, and the clarity in his face, sent a chill down Ned's spine. He was resurrected, after all. He remembered the weirwood in his dreams, the sense of being judged by ancient powers. Sora spoke, voice low. We can't stay here. Even if he recognized you, he won't last long. Ned nodded grimly. I know, but we can't just leave him to die alone. She hesitated. Then we take him with us. And they tried. They made a crude stretcher from branches lashed with scraps of fur, placing the old man upon it. He weighed so little that Ned could carry him with a rope slung over his shoulder. Sora led the way, forging a path out of the valley. The morning light was brittle, the sky a pale iron color. They spoke little, each step a grim acceptance of the reality they faced. The old man's breath grew weaker with every passing hour. By midday, they had managed to climb a narrow ridge from which they could see the vast expanse of snow and ice stretching southward. In the far distance, the hint of the wall might have been visible, a blue-gray line. But Ned couldn't be certain. He squinted, eyes tearing in the icy wind. Sora touched his arm. He's gone. Ned glanced down. The old man lay still on the stretcher, eyes closed, face slack. Ned's throat tightened. Carefully, he lowered the stretcher, kneeling by the body. The old man's chest did not move. He was free of this frozen world. But Ned recalled his last words, don't let me become one of them. He exchanged a look with Sora, who nodded grimly. Together, they dug a shallow grave in the hardened ground near the rocky slope using a broken spear tip they'd found in the camp. It was hard, grueling work, and the hole was barely deep enough to cover him. But they did what they could to ensure he would not rise as a white. When it was done, Ned said a few words in a halting whisper, a prayer to the old gods. Then they covered the grave with stones. The wind keened around them as though mourning. Solra placed a hand on Ned's shoulder, an odd gesture of comfort from someone so guarded. "He's at rest," she said. "Come on. We can't stay." Ned stood, feeling the ache in every muscle. Death was everywhere beyond the wall. He looked south again. That was where he must go, no matter how treacherous the path. They descended the ridge, continuing on a course that would eventually curve around the frost fangs. But as evening neared, the sky turned the color of slate and a howling wind blew in. Snow began to fall in thick, whirling sheets. A blizzard was upon them. Solra cursed. They had little choice but to seek refuge in whatever hollow they could find. After a frantic search, they spotted a narrow gully and hastened into it. The walls rose on either side, offering some shelter from the gale. They found a small overhang where they could crouch and block out the worst of the wind with a makeshift barrier of branches. The storm descended with unbridled fury. Snow piled at the entrance to their shelter. The temperature plummeted. Despite their best efforts, they couldn't get a fire lit. Every spark was snuffed by the raging wind. Ned huddled close to Solra, the desperate press of body heat their only protection. She trembled, and he realized with alarm that her lips were turning blue. He rubbed her arms, trying to keep circulation going, fighting the gnawing numbness in his own extremities. The hours dragged as night fell, the storm relentless. At one point, he thought he heard voices in the storm, faint calls echoing through the swirling whiteness. He tensed, listening, but the wind drowned everything. He feared it might be the others, or perhaps a party of free folk. He prayed that if it was the others, they would not find them hidden in the gully. When dawn finally broke, the storm had mostly passed. The gully was partially filled with drifted snow. Ned had dozed off in sheer exhaustion, only to wake as Solra stirred beside him, exhaling a ragged breath. She was alive, though her face was white with cold. They pushed away the branches, climbing out of their partial shelter. The landscape was transformed into a smooth blanket of white, drifts reshaped by the howling wind. Their tracks had vanished, the path forward was unclear. Still, they kept going. For 2 more days, they wandered. Their provisions were nearly gone, leaving them weak. Ned felt despair gnaw at his heart. Being brought back from death only to perish in these frozen wastes seemed a cruel cosmic joke. Yet each time they found themselves at the brink, some faint stroke of fortune intervened. A break in the weather, a small stream where they could drink, a handful of edible roots Solra recognized from her free folk knowledge. Near the end of the 2nd day after the blizzard, the skies opened up again. Snow swirled thick as curtains. Solra coughed, her face drawn with fatigue. They trudged through a field of deep snow, the wind pushing at them like an unseen enemy. Ned was about to suggest they look for shelter when he glimpsed a faint glow of fire in the distance, flickering through the maelstrom. "Look," he shouted over the wind, pointing. Solra squinted, then nodded. They pressed toward that glow, half blind from the stinging snow. Gradually, the shape of a shelter emerged, possibly a large tent or yurt with light spilling from its seams. Tethered outside were 2 shaggy horses huddled against the cold. Ned and Solra exchanged a wary look. This could be either salvation or doom. But they had no choice. If they remained outside much longer, the cold would claim them. Solra raised a hand in greeting, calling out, "Hello? We mean no harm." No immediate response. Ned and Solra staggered closer, nearly falling against the tent. A heavy flap of hide served as the entrance. Solra lifted it slightly, revealing a warm glow from a brazier inside. The smell of cooked meat wafted out, making Ned's head spin with hunger. Before they could speak, a woman's voice called sharply, "Come in or stay out, but shut the cold behind you." They slipped inside, stooping to avoid the low entrance. A blast of warmth and light enveloped them. The tent was spacious, with thick furs spread across the ground, a brazier at the center, and a ring of small lanterns. 3 figures were there. A stout man with a bushy beard wearing patchwork furs, an older woman with sharp eyes and white streaks in her hair, and a younger man, tall and wiry, with a spear at his side. All 3 stared at Ned and Solra, expressions guarded. Solra spoke first, her voice cracking. "We're half frozen. Been wandering for days. Please, we just need some warmth. Maybe a bite to eat." She glanced at Ned. "We have no quarrel with you." The older woman studied them. "Strangers in the storm. I can guess your story. Many are fleeing or lost these days. Her gaze flicked over Ned. You're no free folk, Crow? Ned shook his head. No. Just a man trying to return south. The stout man spat. South. Full of crows and kings. We've little reason to trust any from that side of the wall. The younger man with the spear shifted. But we can't turn them out to die. An uneasy silence fell. At length, the older woman nodded. You can stay till the storm passes. We have enough food to share a little. But if you bring trouble on us, you'll regret it. Ned bowed his head in gratitude. Solra managed a thankful nod as well. They eased onto a section of fur near the brazier, letting the heat wash over them. Ned's limbs tingled as sensation returned, painfully so. The older woman handed them wooden bowls of a thin stew, which tasted like watered-down broth with chunks of questionable meat. Still, to Ned it was a feast. As they ate, the free folk were quiet, observing them. Finally, the stout man asked in a gruff voice, "What's your name, Crow?" Ned swallowed. "Ned Stark," he answered simply, bracing for whatever reaction might come. He half expected them to sneer or say they'd never heard of him. But the older woman's brow furrowed. "Stark," she repeated. "That name has meaning. The Starks have always been in the north. Wardens of the north, I've heard. Rulers in Winterfell." Ned inclined his head. "I was, once." The stout man barked a laugh. "And yet here you are, half dead, looking no better than a beggar. The great Ned Stark is dead, if I recall tales from travelers." Ned's chest tightened. He said softly. "He was." Silence. The younger man's gaze flicked to Solra, who shrugged as if to say, "Your guess is as good as mine." The older woman's eyes narrowed, studying Ned with an intensity that made him uneasy. Then, to his surprise, she gave a slight nod. "Death is a strange thing these days. Perhaps old Ned Stark stands before me after all." She did not press further, only stirred the stew. "We've all heard the talk of whites and walkers. Maybe the old gods decided to send us a sign. Or maybe it's none of our business." Relief coursed through Ned. He had no desire to argue or prove himself. He only wanted to survive and find a way home to see his children. He offered them what little information he could about the state of the southern kingdoms, though he himself knew little beyond what he'd gleaned before his execution. The free folk offered no great revelations in return, only that the others were on the move, claiming territories deep in the north. Whole clans had vanished. The rise of the White Walkers seemed unstoppable. That night, they all slept in the warmth of the tent, taking turns feeding the brazier. Ned listened to the howling wind outside and felt a curious sense of gratitude to these strangers. In the morning, they might part ways, but for now he and Solra were safe. Sure enough, by dawn, the storm had abated to flurries. The older woman advised Ned and Solra that they would be heading east to join kin closer to the sea. Ned asked about a path to the wall. The stout man snorted that the wall was leagues away, but if they traveled south-southeast, they might cross the Milkwater River and eventually hit the foothills near the giant ice barrier. Solra and Ned exchanged a look. Neither of them relished another long trek through the wilderness. But with the others stirring, staying put was no better. They accepted some provisions from their hosts, dried strips of meat, a few lumps of hard bread in exchange for Ned's solemn promise that if he reached his kin, he would tell them not all free folk were foes. Ned agreed willingly, though he knew the Night's Watch might not be so sympathetic. Yet in his heart he believed that Jon would listen. So they set out once more, continuing this desperate odyssey through the bleak and frozen land. Days turned into a haze of trudging, sleeping in crude shelters, fighting off starvation and frostbite. Each day, Ned drew upon reserves of determination he did not know he possessed. At times, he questioned why he had been resurrected. Why him? Why now? He remembered once saying, when the snows fall and the white winds blow, the lone wolf dies, but the pack survives. Now he was the lone wolf, separated from his pack, battling the very white winds he had once warned of. He also noticed changes in himself. His senses felt keener. Sometimes, when he closed his eyes at night, he swore he could hear the groaning of trees and the hush of the old gods in the rustling branches. Perhaps being so far north attuned him more to those ancient spirits. Or perhaps his resurrection had come with a price, binding him more closely to the powers that dwelt in Weirwood hearts. Solra remained at his side, though it was unclear if she believed his identity. She asked few questions, content to focus on survival. But sometimes, when she thought he wasn't looking, Ned saw her watching him with a mixture of wonder and trepidation, as if she could sense something uncanny about him. In turn, he felt gratitude for her loyalty and regret that he could offer her little beyond companionship in the wilderness. At long last, after many harrowing days and near disasters, they came upon a high ridge overlooking a broad, icy river. The frozen surface glinted in the sunlight, cracks spiderwebbing across it. Beyond the river, the land rose again into rolling hills blanketed by pine and snow. But beyond those hills, Ned saw a faint blue line in the distance. The wall. His breath caught. It was still far, perhaps another few days' journey. But there it stood, impossibly high, a barrier of ice and stone. The threshold to the 7 kingdoms, his homeland. Solra exhaled, leaning on her makeshift walking stick. There it is. I've never been that close. It's bigger than I imagined. Ned stared at it, heart pounding with a potent mixture of awe and dread. The seat of the Night's Watch, the fortress that separated the realms of men from the terrors beyond. So many memories. Visiting the wall in his youth, the biting cold of the tunnel through the ice, the swirl of black cloaks. John was there, or had been, last he knew. If John lived, if he were still with the watch, perhaps Ned could find him. Perhaps. Once we cross, Solra said softly. What will you do? Ned tore his gaze away from the distant wall. I have to see my family. One way or another. He paused. But first I must reach Castle Black. Or any castle. If John is there, he'll help. She studied him. And me. A pang of guilt stirred in Ned's chest. He hadn't considered her future. You could cross too, he said. Ask for refuge. But he knew that was a thin hope at best. The watch rarely welcomed free folk without suspicion. Still, John might show mercy if he had the authority. Solra looked at the horizon, expression solemn. I'll guide you as far as I can. Then we'll see. Right now, let's just get to that wall alive. They climbed down the ridge to the river's edge. The ice looked thick, but crossing would be perilous. They tested each step carefully, sliding forward. The frozen surface creaked under their weight. Midway, a particularly loud crack made them both freeze, hearts pounding. But the ice held. On the far side, the bank was steep, forcing them to scramble up through slick, snow-covered rocks. At the top they paused, panting. The journey had taken nearly everything from them, but they were close. The day was clear, the sky a pale winter blue. Ned shielded his eyes, scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. Then he saw it. Dark shapes against the snow, far in the distance, moving in a slow, deliberate line. At first, he couldn't tell what they were. Men on horseback, perhaps, or a party of wildlings. Solra tensed. People, she whispered, pointing. Ned nodded. We need to be cautious. If it's the watch, they might see you as an enemy. If it's free folk, they might see me as one. They approached carefully, circling around a rocky outcrop, keeping low. As they drew nearer, details resolved. A group of perhaps a dozen figures, clad in ragged furs, some armed with spears or axes. At the center of their line, a travois dragged on poles, carrying something large and slumped. Fear skittered through Ned's veins. The group's steps were hurried, anxious. He thought he saw fear in their eyes, even at a distance. Then he realized what they pulled. A body. Possibly more than one. Solra caught his arm, gesturing for them to stay hidden behind a cluster of rocks. They watched as the group passed, maybe 50 yards away. Ned strained his hearing, picking up fragments of their urgent conversation. Didn't see it until it just rose up out of the snow. We have to burn the bodies before nightfall. Lost 3 more. Can't take this path. Ned's blood ran cold. It was exactly what he feared, encounters with the dead that walked. The group vanished into a hollow, heading west. For a long moment, Ned and Solra remained crouched, listening to the wind. At last, Ned let out a slow breath. They needed to keep moving, but they also needed to avoid whatever the group had encountered. They pressed on southward, climbing and descending hills. Each hour brought the wall closer, looming like a frozen god. By late afternoon, the sun beginning its descent, they spotted a twisted road. Likely a path used by both free folk and rangers. It wound through the hills toward the massive structure of ice. Ned's pulse quickened. If they followed it, they might reach the base of the wall by nightfall. Of course, that assumed no one waylaid them. Exhausted, they climbed a final slope. At the top, they beheld the wall in all its staggering immensity. It towered above the landscape, an unbroken barrier of glittering ice, hundreds of feet high. The air seemed colder near its presence, a perpetual gloom cast by its shadow. Ned thought back to his youth, the time his father had first brought him here. He had been awed then, but now the sight was layered with dread and longing. On the other side lay the Seven Kingdoms, war-torn though they were. On this side lay an army of the dead. Solra stood in silent wonder beside him. She had never been this close. Ned saw both fear and a strange reverence in her eyes. "It's real," she murmured. "A wall of ice from one end of the land to the other. I knew it in my head, but seeing it. It was built in the Age of Heroes," Ned said quietly. "Or so the stories go." She shook her head in disbelief. Then, as if remembering their plight, she frowned. "We need to find a way through without being shot by black arrows." Ned scanned along the base, searching for any sign of a gate or outpost. The main gate at Castle Black was further east, if he recalled correctly. But the structure was so vast it was difficult to gauge distances. There were smaller fortifications as well, though many were abandoned. If they blundered onto one that was manned by men in black cloaks who saw them as invaders, it could end poorly. They trudged closer, slipping into the shadow cast by the immense wall of ice. The cold intensified as if they walked into a chamber of frost. The ground was slick, covered in centuries-old drifts that never fully melted. Ned's breath plumed before him. Suddenly, Solra froze, gesturing for Ned to stop. He squinted ahead. Two dark figures were emerging from a cleft in the ice, carrying torches that burned bright against the gloom. They were dressed in black leathers and cloaks, though battered. Each carried a sword at his hip, a crossbow slung over a shoulder. Night's Watch Rangers, Ned realized, heart-pounding. He turned to Solra, who looked ready to bolt. He caught her arm gently. "Wait," he murmured. "We need them. They can get us inside." She hesitated, jaw clenched. "They'll kill me." Ned's mind raced. "Not if they see you're with me. If I can convince them I'm Lord Stark." Even as he said it, he knew how mad it sounded. Yet what choice did they have? They had come this far. He had come back from death itself. He would not falter now. With a nod, Ned stepped forward, hands raised to show he was unarmed. "Ho there," he called, his voice echoing off the ice. The Rangers spun, torches flaring. "Who goes?" one barked, leveling his crossbow. Ned swallowed the knot of fear in his throat. "My name is Eddard Stark. I need to speak with your Lord Commander or with anyone in charge." A tense silence. The second Ranger let out a coarse laugh. "That's a good one. Ned Stark's dead. Now step forward slowly, both of you, or I'll put a bolt in your gut." Ned glanced back at Solra. She looked torn, but she obeyed, lifting her hands and moving alongside him. They approached the Rangers, who studied them with hard eyes. "You're dressed like a wildling," the first Ranger noted, eyeing Solra. "And you," he glared at Ned, "look like you crawled out of a grave." Ned met his stare. "That's not far from the truth." He tried to keep his voice steady. "Please, just take me to Castle Black. If Jon Snow is there, he'll confirm who I am." The mention of Jon Snow made the men exchange looks. The second Ranger lowered his crossbow slightly, confusion knitting his brows. "You know the Lord Commander's name?" Ned's heart nearly stopped. "The Lord Commander?" That meant Jon Snow is Lord Commander, he breathed. He had suspected, but to have it confirmed sent a rush of fierce pride and sorrow through him. "Aye, he is," the Ranger replied. "Though it's not a name we hear from free folk or deserters." "You sure you're not with Mance's lot?" Ned shook his head. "No. I swear it by the old gods. Let me speak to my son." The Rangers hesitated, uncertain. Finally, one of them turned toward the cleft in the ice. "We'll take them in. But if you try anything..." Ned raised his hands again. "We won't." They led Ned and Solra through the opening, a narrow tunnel hewn from the wall itself. The cold inside was intense, the walls of ice on either side glowing with a ghostly blue luminescence. The Rangers guided them with their torches, the light flickering on the vaulted ceiling overhead. Ned's mind spun with 1,000 questions. Jon was Lord Commander. How much time had passed? Had the realm changed so greatly? At the far end of the tunnel, a sturdy iron gate awaited them, guarded by more black-clad watchmen. A flurry of alarms spread as they saw the new arrivals. Ned braced himself for hostility, but the rangers merely barked for the gate to be opened. Soon, they passed into a courtyard of sorts, ringed by tall wooden ramps and towers. Ned recognized the construction typical of the Watch, though everything felt different, overshadowed by tension. A black brother approached, an older man with a graying beard. "Who are these two?" he demanded. The ranger who'd led them answered, "He claims to be Ned Stark and wants to speak to the Lord Commander." A low murmur swept the assembled men. The older man fixed Ned with a skeptical glare. "We'll see about that. Stay here." He ordered 2 watchmen to keep crossbows trained on Solra, who stood rigid, eyes flicking nervously. Ned felt a pang of guilt for dragging her into this. They waited. The minutes stretched painfully. Then footsteps sounded on the walkway above. A voice called down, calm but edged with authority, "Bring them in." Ned recognized the voice, felt his heart lurch. They were ushered through a set of heavy doors into a large chamber that might have been a storage hall or meeting room. There, standing by a brazier, was Jon Snow. He wore the black of the Watch, a cloak with the white fur of a wolf at the collar. His hair was dark and unruly, his face older than Ned remembered, tempered by command. Yet the eyes were still Jon's, and Ned felt a surge of emotion so strong he could scarcely breathe. Jon's eyes flicked over Solra, then locked onto Ned. At first, they held only confusion. Then something flickered there, recognition, disbelieving hope. His voice caught, barely above a whisper, "Father." Ned felt tears threaten. He forced a nod, speaking with the quiet conviction that only truth could bring. "Jon, it's me." A stunned hush gripped the room. The watchmen around them looked from Jon to Ned in astonishment. Jon took a hesitant step forward, his gaze never leaving Ned's face. "You died." I saw," he stumbled over the words. A swirl of emotions warred in his eyes, joy, fear, doubt, longing. Ned swallowed. "Yes. But I'm here now." For a moment, neither father nor son moved. Then Jon closed the distance in 2 strides and seized Ned in a fierce embrace. Ned collapsed against him, overwhelmed. He felt Jon's warmth, the solidity of him, and clutched his son as though he might vanish. The tears he had held at bay finally slipped down his cheeks, hot against the chill of the air. "Lord Commander," someone protested weakly, but Jon waved him off, eyes blurred with tears of his own. "This is my father," he said, voice thick with emotion, as if that single statement banished all questions. The gathered brothers exchanged incredulous glances. At length, Jon stepped back, releasing Ned, his face a swirl of disbelief. "How's this possible?" he asked, voice trembling. Ned shook his head slowly. "I don't know. But by the grace of the old gods, I was spared, or brought back. I woke beyond the wall, alone." He cast a quick look at Solra. "I owe my life to her. She helped me survive." Jon's gaze shifted to Solra, who stood rigid under the scrutiny of armed watchmen. He nodded slowly, a look of gratitude crossing his features. "Then you have my thanks." He beckoned for her to be allowed a step closer. The crossbows were lowered, though not entirely put away. "Welcome to Castle Black," Jon said, more formally, his voice carrying the weight of command. "No harm will come to you here, so long as you keep the peace. We have enough enemies without killing those who would be friends." She dipped her head. "Thank you," she murmured, glancing sidelong at Ned. A look passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of everything they had endured. Jon turned back to Ned, laying a hand on his arm. "There's so much to say, so much has happened." He exhaled, voice shaky. "Rob, mother, the wars." "Father," but words failed him. He gestured to a door at the far end of the hall. "Come. We'll talk in private." Ned followed, heart pounding. Solra lingered behind, uncertain, but Jon beckoned her as well. The watchman parted, still eyeing her warily. The older man, who seemed to be Jon's lieutenant, gave a curt nod, as if acknowledging that some extraordinary event was unfolding. They entered a smaller room lit by torches. Maps of the wall and the lands beyond were pinned to wooden boards. A thick fur rug covered part of the stone floor. Jon shut the door, turning to face Ned fully. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Jon's features carried the weight of leadership and loss, far more than when Ned last saw him as a boy. Ned felt both pride and sorrow. At length Jon spoke. "We all believed you dead. The entire realm. Sansa, Arya, and Bran," he faltered, eyes filling. "We lost so much, father." Ned set a trembling hand on Jon's shoulder. "I know some of it. I remember the moment I died. I've been gone so long. My boy, my dear boy, I am sorry for all you've had to endure." He wished he could gather all his children, hold them, apologize for not being there. Jon's voice steadied, though emotion still ran in it. "We must send word to them. They must know you live. But the North is in turmoil. So much has changed since he trailed off. Ned's gaze flicked to Solra, who lingered a respectful distance away, uncertain if she should hear these matters. He turned back to Jon, voice low. I want to see my family. I want to protect them if I can. But I also know the real war is here, against the others. I've seen signs of them. I've seen what they do. Jon nodded grimly. Yes. They're gathering. It's worse than anyone in the South believes. They're too busy fighting over crowns. He looked between Ned and Solra. We need every ally we can get, free folk or otherwise. Solra cleared her throat softly, stepping forward. I'm no kneeler, but I owe Ned Stark my life, and now you say you're his son. If you're truly fighting the White Walkers, I'd stand with you if it means we all survive. Jon regarded her carefully. Then his gaze returned to Ned. Father, there will be doubts, many of them. People will question if you are who you say. Even some of my men. We'll have to prove it somehow. Ned thought of the old days, the lords who had known him, the secrets he shared with close friends. We'll find a way, he said quietly. The truth will out. Jon nodded. For now, rest. We'll see to your wounds, your hunger. Then we talk and we plan. He gave Ned a searching look. What the gods have given us. I won't squander it. Ned felt tears threaten again. He stepped forward, pulling Jon into another embrace. In that moment, the years of loss, the sorrow of his execution, and the miracle of this reunion all crystallized into a single trembling breath. Father and son. Stark and Snow. At the edge of the world, on the brink of a night unending, they stood together. Whatever lay ahead, war, the undead, or the tumult of the Southern Thrones, Ned Stark had not been defeated by death. He was here, with his son, ready to face the coming darkness, determined to see his family again. And in his heart he felt the silent reverberation of an ancient truth: the North remembers, and so did he. That night, Ned slept in a cell-like room provided by the Watch. The bed was hard, the walls stark, but it was warm. He stared at the ceiling, mind swirling with gratitude and apprehension. He had found Jon, discovered that his boy was now Lord Commander, a testament to the trials he must have faced. But what of Sansa, Arya, Bran, and Rickon? What of Robb and his war? Catelyn? The wave of questions threatened to swallow him. But he reminded himself of the small victory. He was here, a ghost returned from the grave, and soon he would learn the fate of his children. Outside, the wind whispered against the ice. Ned thought he heard it calling his name, a mournful sound. But he also felt the presence of the old gods, as though they watched through the ravens, through the weirwood trees, guiding him. At length, exhaustion took him. Before he drifted off, he whispered a silent prayer of thanks. He was alive. He had found his son. For now, that was enough. The next morning, he and Jon spoke at length. Jon confirmed much of what Ned feared. Robb had marched south but had been betrayed. The details were painfully vague, but it seemed Robb Stark had fallen along with many loyal Northerners. His mother, too, was lost. A shadow passed over Ned's face as he absorbed this news. The war had reaped a bitter harvest. Sansa was rumored to have been a captive in King's Landing but had escaped. Arya's whereabouts were unknown. Bran and Rickon, the stories were contradictory, but some believed they were dead, others that they lived in hiding. Every piece of information was like a knife twisting in Ned's heart. He fought to maintain composure, to keep his voice steady. Jon, no stranger to grief, laid a hand on his father's arm. We'll find them, Jon said softly. However we must. The realm owes you that much. We owe you that much. Ned blinked back tears. My boy, it's I who owe a debt. To you, to the memory of Robb and your mother. I should have been there. But he could not finish. A tightness closed his throat. Jon shook his head. You did what you could. The fault lies in those who would betray and spill blood for a throne. But now you're here. That changes everything. Ned drew a ragged breath. Yes. And I'll do what I must. The others are coming, I've seen proof of their terrors. The living must unite, or all is lost. Jon's gaze hardened. That's what I've been trying to tell the Southern Lords. Some listen, many don't. But your return, father, it could inspire them, if they believe. Ned managed a weary smile. Then we'll make them believe. In the days that followed, word spread quietly through Castle Black that a man claiming to be Eddard Stark had returned. Most were skeptical. But Jon's unwavering conviction silenced much of the muttering. A few older Black brothers who had once known Ned or served at Winterfell came forward, staring at him with wide eyes and uncertain hearts. One recognized the shape of a long-ago scar on Ned's forearm received in Robert's rebellion. Another recalled Ned's measured tone, the way he listened before speaking. Slowly, the whispers of doubt shifted toward eerie acceptance. The living ghost of Ned Stark walked among them. Meanwhile, Solra found herself in an uneasy alliance with the Watch. She kept her distance, but Jon allowed her to stay, offering what protection he could. She confided in Ned that once he was settled, she would slip away back to her people. But Ned, feeling a debt to her, encouraged her to remain for a time, at least until they could ensure the free folk might join forces against the others. Her pragmatic nature kept her there, though she often muttered about crows and kneelers, feigning disdain. Yet Ned saw in her eyes a flicker of respect for what Jon was trying to accomplish. A fortnight after Ned's arrival, Jon called a council of sorts in the old mess hall, bringing together his most trusted brothers along with a handful of free folk representatives who had come south of the wall under tenuous truces. Ned, of course, was present, standing at Jon's right hand. A hush fell when the talk turned to the White Walkers. One free folk warrior recounted a chilling tale of whites attacking a camp in the night, unstoppable until they were burned. Another black brother told of rangers lost beyond the wall, never to return. Then Jon spoke, voice ringing clear. "We must unite. The Starks have ever been guardians of the North. Now my father, Lord Eddard Stark, has returned to us by the grace of the old gods. Let none doubt that the threat we face is larger than old hatreds and feuds. The living must stand together, or the dead will claim us all." Ned heard his words echo in the cavernous hall, saw the flicker of uncertainty and resolve in the faces of those gathered. Once Ned had knelt before the throne in King's Landing, hoping to spare the realm from war. He had failed. But perhaps here, at the wall, on the brink of the true war, he could help lead men to stand against the darkness. In the days that followed, ravens were sent south, bearing letters penned by Jon, bearing Ned Stark's signature in a hand that many lords would recognize. The realm would learn of his improbable return and the dire need for unity. Whether they would believe or heed the call remained to be seen. But Ned felt a stirring of purpose in his chest. He had been granted a second chance. He would use it to fight for the living, to find his children, to honor the memory of Robb and Catelyn. Sometimes at night, Ned still woke with a start, expecting to find himself alone in the cold forest beyond the wall, uncertain of his own existence. But then he would hear the distant horn calls, the voices of the Night's Watch, the reassuring heartbeat of life around him. And he would remember, he had come home, not to Winterfell, but to the north nonetheless, to the very edge where life stood against death. He was Ned Stark, father to Jon, and soon, if fate was kind, father again to those children he had lost. His mind turned often to the prophecy swirling around the prince that was promised, the notion that some champion of light would arise to vanquish the dark. He had never put much stock in prophecy. Yet now, standing at Jon's side, hearing how his son had been chosen by both men of the Watch and free folk, Ned wondered if perhaps destiny did play a hand. For in Jon's eyes, he saw strength and compassion, a willingness to bear burdens beyond his years. If the realm needed a savior, perhaps it was Jon Snow, the bastard son of Winterfell, though Ned alone knew the deeper truths of Jon's birth. A secret he had carried to the grave and, it seemed, beyond. Yet that was a concern for another time. For now, father and son worked side by side, forging alliances, planning defenses. They prepared the Watch and the free folk for the battles that would inevitably come. Ned shared his knowledge of strategy, gleaned from wars past. He listened to the free folk, learning their ways, encouraging respect rather than scorn. In small moments, he and Jon stole time to speak of personal things, memories of Winterfell, the siblings, the joys and sorrows that had shaped them. Those conversations were bittersweet, but they reminded Ned why he fought. The nights grew longer, colder. Reports of white attacks increased. The realm below was still in turmoil, uncertain whether to believe the Raven's messages. But a sliver of hope glimmered at Castle Black, fueled by the unshakable bond between a father returned from death and the son who had risen to lead the Night's Watch. Ned sometimes gazed at the stars and imagined the day he might walk through Winterfell's gates again, place a hand on the old weirwood tree in the Godwood, and see Sansa, Arya, Bran, Rickon. He yearned to hold them, to let them know that even death could not keep him from them. But until that day came, he would stand at the wall, defending the living from the encroaching night, forging whatever alliances were necessary. And in quiet, unspoken moments, he offered a silent thanks to the old gods for granting him this chance to do his duty, to his family, to the north, and to all the realms of men. He was Ned Stark, once Lord of Winterfell, now a man resurrected, cloaked in the knowledge of life beyond death. And he would not falter. Not again. The North remembered, and so did he. Ned Stark woke early, roused by the distant call of a horn somewhere within the maze of Castle Black. He lay for a moment on the thin mattress, blinking sleep from his eyes while the torchlight beyond the chamber door flickered in the corridor. Sometimes it took him a moment to remember where he was, not in the bedchamber of Winterfell, not in the chill wilderness beyond the wall, but inside these ancient fortifications of the Night's Watch. The dawn wind whistled faintly, a reminder that his new life was perched on the edge of a truly vast and hostile frontier. Yet the biting gust that seeped through the stones also stirred a sense of renewed purpose in him. He stretched his arms, feeling the ache in his muscles from so many hard rides and cold marches. Often his first waking thought was of the children he had lost, Rob, gone to betrayal and war, Bran and Rickon, uncertain fates. Then he would recall what Jon had told him of Sansa and Arya, how they had been scattered by events he had not been alive to witness. The grief for them all sat heavy on his chest. Yet more and more that grief hardened into resolve. He had been granted this impossible second life, and each day he intended to use it to set right what he could. He rose and dressed in the simple garments the watch had provided. A rough-spun tunic, breeches, boots. Over that he slung a cloak of black wool, though he was not sworn to the watch himself. The chill in this chamber was ever present, thanks to the frozen mass of the wall looming just outside. He took a moment to steady himself. Still, sometimes his limbs felt as though they didn't quite belong to him, and then he stepped out into the corridor. A guard recognized him immediately and inclined his head in a mix of respect and disbelief. The hush of that small acknowledgement reminded Ned that, for these men, the living ghost of Eddard Stark walked among them. He made his way to the common hall, where a small meal was set out for early risers. A few brothers of the Night's Watch sat on benches, warming their hands around wooden bowls of thin porridge. They glanced at Ned but said little. He recognized in their eyes the flicker of awe and apprehension. By now most believed he was truly who he claimed. There were enough older watchmen who had known him years ago, enough signs that could not be easily faked. Still, the story of his resurrection unnerved many. Ghosts and wights were the stuff of terror here, and though Ned was neither undead monster nor illusion, some men still muttered about sorcery. He did not blame them. Had their situations been reversed, he might have struggled to believe too. He accepted a bowl of porridge from the old cook, mumbling thanks. The man only nodded, as though uncertain whether one gave formal courtesy to a lord returned from beyond the grave. Ned's mouth curved into a small, sad smile. Every day, the strangeness of his predicament confronted him in some small way. He sat down at the far edge of a bench, spooning the gritty porridge into his mouth. It was hot, if tasteless, and provided a modicum of strength. He thought of the feasts at Winterfell, thick stews and fresh bread, pies sweetened with honey, but such memories felt as though they belonged to another lifetime. Before he could finish, the main door swung open with a creak, admitting a swirl of frigid air. Jon Snow entered, his black cloak trailing behind him. He looked weary, dark circles under his eyes, his hair pulled back in a knot. Yet the sight of him quickened Ned's heart every time, for here was his boy, no longer a boy but a man grown and Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. Jon spotted his father and crossed the hall in quick strides. "Father," he greeted in a low tone, pausing to rest a hand on Ned's shoulder. His eyes flicked to the half-empty bowl. "Apologies for interrupting your breakfast." Ned set the spoon aside with a faint smile. "It's no feast. I can bear to leave it. Is aught amiss?" Jon pressed his lips together. A raven arrived. Sansa has reached the neck. All other thoughts vanished. Ned stood, forgetting the bowl entirely. The neck? With whom? Is she safe? She's traveling with Brienne of Tarth, apparently, and a small escort. Word came from Moat Cailin. They'll head north soon. Jon paused, the corners of his mouth curving in something like hope. It's the best news we've had in a while. Ned's heart pounded. So Sansa was alive and on her way, possibly to the Wall, or at least toward Winterfell's region. But where to exactly was uncertain. Does she know about me? Jon shook his head. I told our emissaries to keep the matter quiet. She's endured so much. Hearing that you live might be more overwhelming than reassuring if it came from strangers. Ned nodded slowly, though he felt an ache of longing. He wanted nothing more than to see his daughter, to protect her from whatever horrors she had faced. But he understood Jon's caution. The news of Ned Stark's return could spread dangerously, attracting foes as well as allies. Then let us meet her ourselves. If we can spare the men. Or has she said she intends to travel this far north? Jon's dark gray eyes flickered with a mix of tension and warmth. She's uncertain from the sound of it. Moat Cailin is still a ruin, but she's apparently gathering loyal northern folk there, ones who answered her call. I think she hopes to reclaim Winterfell, or at least rally the north for the battles to come. Ned inhaled, a slow breath that braced him against the swirl of emotions. My brave girl. That was the Sansa he remembered, once timid, enamored of southern songs but with a hidden steel of her own. The fact that she was taking steps to gather the north gave him pride and sorrow both. She should never have had to bear such burdens. We should go to her, then. Or if you cannot leave your command, I will go. Jon studied his father's face. We'll see how the day goes. If the others were not a looming threat, I would ride with you myself. But these walls need me, especially with the wildlings crossing daily to escape the terrors beyond the wall. Ned rested a hand on Jon's arm. I understand. But let's do what we must to ensure Sansa's safety. Moat Cailin is a half-ruin. She needs more than a small escort. He paused, glancing at the men in the hall. Though he spoke in a quiet voice, a few Black brothers had begun to listen. Word traveled fast in Castle Black's tight quarters. I'll gather my gear. We can speak in private about how best to arrange it. Jon gave a curt nod. Meet me in my solar in half an hour. I have other tidings as well, some from the south and some from beyond the wall. Ned saw worry etched into his son's features. I'll be there. Jon left the hall, cloak swirling behind him. Ned drained the last of the porridge and followed shortly after, handing the bowl back to the cook with a murmured thanks. He walked through the courtyard, where fresh snow had fallen in the night, blanketing the timbers and catwalks with a thin white coat. A pair of watchmen were drilling in the yard, their practice swords clacking dully. Near the gate, he glimpsed Solra, the free folkwoman who had kept him alive beyond the wall. She stood near a brazier, speaking with a handful of men who wore battered leathers rather than the uniform black. Likely her people or some other free folk guests. She caught sight of Ned, met his gaze for an instant with a small nod, and returned to her conversation. He still owed her a debt. She had guided him through deadly terrain, saved him from starvation. In turn, she had found a kind of uneasy refuge here under Jon's leadership. She was not precisely comfortable in a fortress of crows, but she sensed the necessity of forging alliances if any of them were to survive the winter that marched inexorably closer. Ned climbed the worn steps into the keep. Torchlight flickered along the corridor. He made his way to the small chamber he'd been allotted, where he gathered his old sword, replaced by the watch after his arrival, not ice, for that sword had been lost, but a sturdy longsword that fit his grip well enough. He donned a thicker cloak, belted on his scabbard, and took a moment to examine himself in the polished metal that served as a mirror. A gaunt face, streaked with lines of strain, looked back at him, hair salted with gray. Yet the eyes were the same gray ones he had always carried, the eyes of a Stark. He did not quite appear like a man returning from the grave, but an old weariness clung to him. For an instant, he remembered the last time he had donned a sword for anything but ceremonial reasons. That had been in King's Landing. And it had ended. He exhaled, pushing the memory away. This was a new day. He had new responsibilities. Leaving the small chamber, he made his way through a twisting corridor to Jon's solar. 2 guards stood outside the door but waved him in without challenge. Inside, Jon waited at a wooden table strewn with maps. A small brazier offered warmth, and the single narrow window let in a ray of pale daylight that gleamed on the chipped pewter candlesticks. By Jon's side stood Dolorous Ed, the dour-faced steward who often assisted him. Also present was a tall youth with curly hair and earnest eyes, a new recruit if Ned recalled rightly. Jon dismissed the young recruit with a nod, and Dolorous Ed gave Ned a solemn greeting. Lord Stark, he said with a bleak sort of respect, as though still uncertain how to address him. Then he slipped from the chamber, leaving father and son alone. Jon ran a hand through his hair. We have 2 matters of urgency. One is Sansa's presence at Moat Cailin, which I mentioned. The other, he tapped a piece of parchment lying beside the maps. Another raven came from Eastwatch by the sea. Reports of a free folk scout who claims the others are massing in the far north. He says entire clans have fallen without a fight. The White Walkers send whites ahead of them, flush out the living, then kill or turn them. Ned drew closer, staring down at the parchment. The letter was short, scrawled in haste, describing how men on a fishing vessel had seen an unearthly glow on the northern coastline, pale shapes moving at night. Ned felt that cold dread again, the awareness that the Great War was not merely a rumor but an inevitability. How soon? He asked quietly. Jon's lips pressed together. We can't be sure. Mance Rayder once tried to unite the free folk to move south quickly, but that union shattered. Now, the White Walkers pick off small clans at will. It might be weeks, or it might be months. But eventually they'll reach us. The question is whether we can rally enough forces to resist them before that day arrives. Ned closed his eyes for a moment, remembering those terrible tales told by old Nan, the glimpses he'd had beyond the wall, half-seen shapes in the snow, the hush of malevolence. It must be soon, he said, voice hollow. We cannot fight them alone. The southern lords must be made to understand. Jon's gaze flicked up. We sent ravens. Some respond, but most are mired in their own quarrels. Even with your name attached, there are plenty who doubt. Or if they believe, they decide it's not their concern. Some call it a northern problem. A spike of anger and frustration went through Ned, but he quelled it. Then perhaps it's time we speak to them in person. Not me alone, but you, me, and whoever else can lend credibility. If we can secure the North under Stark leadership again. Sansa might be forging alliances at Moat Cailin for precisely that reason. Then we could move on the rest of the realm with a united front, urging them to join us against the dead. Jon's face was uncertain. I can't leave the wall for long. The Night's Watch must stand guard. I barely trust some of the new recruits, not to mention the tension that still simmers between us and certain lords who resent that I've let so many free folk pass. Ned understood. Then let me go in your stead. If the others see Ned Stark returned, standing with Sansa, they might rally. Or at least they'll pause to hear. We can gather the remaining northern lords, the Manderleys, the Umbers, the Glovers, see who remains loyal. Together we might retake Winterfell from any who still hold it. Then, with Winterfell as a seat, we can better coordinate. The wall will be your front. Ours will be the rest. Jon nodded slowly. It's risky. There are those in the south who hated you even in life, and now, with rumors of resurrection, some might call you an abomination. Or a trick meant to sow discord. That's a risk we'll have to take. Ned sighed. My greatest fear is that while we try to unify the North, we'll be too late for the real war. But sitting idle is no option. Jon clasped Ned's forearm. Agreed. I'll send a small party of Black brothers to escort you, ones I trust. It won't be a large force, but you'll have recognized men at your side. And I must not forget Solra, Ned said. She knows the Wildlands, might offer good counsel for dealing with the free folk we encounter on the way south. And she'd rather come with me than stay penned among crows. Jon gave a short laugh. Very well. I imagine she'd prefer that indeed. Let her come if she's willing. You'll depart as soon as we can gather supplies. He cast a look at the map. You know the way to Moat Cailin. It's still a ruin, but serviceable as a meeting point. And from there, you and Sansa can decide how to proceed. Ned managed a half-smile, though worry gnawed at him. He thought of how Sansa had been a child the last time he saw her. Now, so much had changed. Would she even recognize him, or he her? I'll leave at dawn tomorrow, if that pleases you, Lord Commander. Jon's expression softened. Father, there's no need to be formal with me. Force of habit, Ned murmured, and they shared a rare flicker of warmth, father and son bound by a love that transcended all the strange fates that had befallen them. Very well. Tomorrow at dawn. Jon nodded. You'll do what must be done. And if the gods are kind, Sansa will greet you with joy. His face turned pensive. I only wish we knew more of Arya, Bran, and Rickon. Ned felt that pang again. We'll search. We'll send out ravens, ask after them in every northern house. One battle at a time. They spoke a while longer, discussing logistics, the route, the men who would ride with Ned, how they might coordinate with the Night's Watch if new tidings arrived. Eventually, Jon stood, turning to the window. The light outside was cold and spare, illuminating the ridges of the thick ice. I must prepare as well. Another war meeting with the free folk leaders. Perhaps they'll have more news of the others. He paused, glancing at Ned over his shoulder. I'm proud to have you back. Whatever happens, I want you to know that. Ned felt tears threaten. It was a simple statement, but it meant the world. And I'm proud of you, he replied, voice quiet. You've done what few men could. You've led with honor. You are my son. Jon swallowed, then left the solar, his face set. Ned lingered a moment longer, gazing at the swirling lines on the map. The sun was creeping higher now, glinting off the snowy courtyard outside. Tomorrow, he would ride south to meet a daughter who believed him long dead. He wondered how the old gods would measure that reunion, or whether they watched from the heart trees with sorrowful eyes. He left the solar and made his way toward the courtyard, wanting to check on the horses and see if his limited possessions were ready to be packed. On the way, he passed Solra, who had parted from her group of free folk and stood leaning against a wall, arms folded. She had never fully relaxed within these walls, always looking as though she were half a heartbeat from fleeing. She caught sight of him and raised an eyebrow. You look like a man who's about to travel, she said in her rough way. Going back south, are you? He nodded. Yes, to Moat Cailin to join my daughter. Then, hopefully, to rally the north. She considered that, her gaze flicking over him. You'll need a guide past the neck if you mean to avoid bogs and the Ironborn remnants. The free folk don't know that land, but I've traveled a fair bit with others who came around the coastline. Ned offered a faint smile. I was hoping you might come, but I won't demand it. You owe me nothing. Solra barked a laugh, though it was devoid of real humor. We've been through too much for me to leave you to your own devices. Besides, there are few better ways to see the shape of the world than riding at the side of a resurrected lord. She tilted her head. You realize I'm not kneeling, right? I'm free folk still. He inclined his head. I expect no kneeling. She nodded. Then I'll join you. Truth be told, living among these crows makes my skin itch. I'll see more of your southern lands before the real cold sets in. A pause. You've changed, Stark. I see how you speak to your son and your men. You carry death with you, like a shadow, but you also carry hope. He regarded her, uncertain how to reply. At last he said softly, I've been granted a second chance. I won't squander it. Solra snorted, folding her arms. Then let's hope the gods give us enough time. I'll gather my gear. They parted, and Ned felt a curious gratitude for her company. She was blunt, irreverent, but a survivor, a kindred soul in some respects. He spent the rest of the day preparing, selecting sturdy mounts, assembling a traveling party of half a dozen Black brothers men John trusted for both skill at arms and loyalty. They stocked supplies on 2 pack horses, plus an assortment of dried meats, flasks of water, salted fish, extra clothing. The distance to Moat Cailin was not vast by southern standards, but winter's approach made every journey treacherous. That evening Ned shared a final supper with John and a few of the watch's officers in the Great Hall. The meal was plain bread, onions, a meager portion of roasted goat, but spiced by the presence of camaraderie. They spoke little of politics or the war to come. The men of the watch told stories of small amusements, jokes about misfit recruits, or the latest fiasco in the kitchens. For a brief time Ned almost felt normal, as though he were among friends at Winterfell. But the moment was fleeting, overshadowed by the knowledge that soon they would part, each to their grim duties. Before he retired, John accompanied him to the courtyard where torchlight glimmered on the snow. Safe travels, John said quietly, taking Ned's arm in a firm grip. Bring Sansa home if you can. Let us all gather again. Ned embraced him. I will. That's a promise. Then he paused, searching John's face. Stay alive, Jon Snow. A ghost of a smile tugged at John's lips. I've had practice. I intend to keep breathing until this war is done. They parted with that. Ned climbed the stairs to his chamber, each footstep echoing. He slept fitfully, dreams haunted by images of Winterfell's broken gates, the crypts below, his children's faces flickering in and out of shadows. But he also dreamt of weirwoods, their red leaves whispering as though urging him onward. At dawn, the gates creaked open and Ned's party rode out into the cold gloom. He was mounted on a black gelding that had once belonged to a ranger lost beyond the wall, and the horse had a nervous temperament, prone to snorting and stamping at the slightest noise. But Ned managed him well enough. Solra rode beside him, astride a shaggy gray mare. The Black brothers formed a loose escort. John stood on the ramparts above, watching them go. Ned lifted a hand and John returned the gesture in silence. They set a course south, winding along the wide, rutted path that led toward the base of the wall's eastern side. The landscape was desolate, the sky a washout gray. The cold air stung Ned's face, though he was grateful that there was no fresh snowfall. As they left Castle Black behind, the sense of stepping into the unknown pressed upon him, even though these lands were more familiar than those beyond the wall. He had not traveled here since before his imprisonment in King's Landing, and so much had changed. The first day passed quietly, the horses trudging through a dusting of snow. The Black brothers were cautious, scanning the horizon. They had learned that in times like these, danger might arrive in many forms: bandits, roaming monsters, or deserters. But they encountered no one save a small band of free folk crossing north under a makeshift flag of truce, presumably to find relatives beyond the wall. By nightfall, they found shelter in an abandoned watchtower near the King's Road. The roof was partly caved in, but it offered enough cover to keep out the wind. Ned and his companions built a fire in the tower's courtyard, the flames casting dancing shadows on the crumbling stone walls. As they huddled around the warmth, Solra produced some dried meat she had bartered for in Castle Black. The Black brothers ate quietly, still unused to a free folk woman among them. A man named Garth, lean and scarred, ventured a question. So, you guided Lord Stark beyond the wall? Solra glanced at him, lips twisting with faint amusement. Guided, saved, dragged, yes. He was half dead when I found him. Garth looked to Ned, astonishment clear on his face. It's true then. You truly died? Ned gave a weary nod. I remember the moment the sword fell. I remember darkness. Then next I knew I was waking in the northern wilderness. A silence settled, heavy with awe and discomfort. Another black brother, a broad man named Lothar, muttered a brief prayer under his breath. Though none of them doubted Ned's identity, the details of his resurrection were still unnerving to contemplate. Finally, Garth said, "Well, we're grateful you're here now, my lord. Might be we need a man like you in the days ahead." Ned offered him a tight smile. "If it serves any greater cause, then I'm glad too." They let the topic rest. The wind whistled through cracks in the stone, and the fire snapped. One of the brothers took first watch, standing with a spear at the tower entrance. The rest settled around the fire, pulling their cloaks tight. Ned leaned his back against a broken wall, listening to the flicker of flames, feeling the tension that came whenever darkness fell. The memory of white shadows stirring beyond the wall still gnawed at him. Every twig snap or gust of wind in the distance made him alert. Yet no threat emerged. Eventually he drifted into a light doze, lulled by the cinder glow on the stones. On the second day they resumed their journey early, pressing south along the King's Road. The once famous highway was in poor repair here, full of ruts and uneven patches. Some sections were caked with old snow, others turned to slush by midday sun. Solra scouted ahead, claiming she had a keener eye for movement among the trees. They passed a frozen lake where the wind cut viciously. In the distance, Ned glimpsed the shape of a half-burned mill. War had left scars even this far north. They encountered signs of old battles, 2 scattered arrowheads, a rusted helm half buried in the mud. Once, near midday, they found the remains of an overturned wagon, rotted beams scattered, the contents long looted. The hush of desolation reminded Ned of how the realm had been torn apart by the War of the Five Kings. Now only a few travelers seemed to move on these roads, each one cloaked in desperation or caution. That evening they camped by a cluster of bent pines near a small stream. As they fed the horses and settled in, Garth came to Ned with a question. "My lord, if I may, what do we do if we run into southern knights or soldiers who don't believe you're who you claim? Or who do believe it and mean you harm?" Ned considered. "We keep the peace if we can. We only fight if we must. We'll rely on recognition or the mention of Jon Snow's authority if they doubt. For now, I have no quarrel with any living man. The real foe is in the north." Garth nodded. "That's what I figured. I just wanted to be sure. The realm can be a dangerous place if folk think you have a claim they don't like." Ned knew that well enough. "We proceed with caution," he said simply, placing a reassuring hand on the man's shoulder. On the third day, they left the King's Road for a narrower track leading southwest, aiming to cross fields and low hills toward the neck. Around midday, they saw columns of black smoke in the distance. Concerned, they rode closer to investigate and found a small village reduced to smoldering ruins. Houses had been burned, the thatched roofs collapsed into ash. The stench of charred wood hung heavy, and the few villagers who survived were huddled near a gutted barn, their faces smudged with soot and desperation. Ned dismounted, carefully approaching. A frightened woman clutched a child to her side, backing away as he drew near. "We mean no harm," he called, voice pitched low. "We're travelers. What happened here?" An older man, hair singed, coughed violently. "Bandits," he rasped. "Came last night. Took what little we had and put torches to the rest. Rode off laughing." Ned felt anger flare. The wars had sown chaos, leaving small folk vulnerable. "Did they say who they served?" The old man spat. "They served themselves is all. Wore bits of mismatched armor, a few with tattered house Bolton cloaks. Dogs, the lot of them. They killed half the village." He staggered, nearly falling to his knees. One of the black brothers moved to help, offering the man a skin of water. Ned surveyed the wreckage, sickened. House Bolton. Though the Boltons had once sworn fealty to the Starks, their treachery in the war was well known, Ramsay Bolton especially, though Ned had only learned fragments of that tale from Jon. It seemed some of their men still roamed unchecked. The child's wide eyes caught Ned's, full of fear and confusion. Solra approached from behind, posture tense. "These people need help," she murmured. "But we can't linger, can we?" Ned grimaced. "We can give them what spare supplies we have. A little food, some bandages, though it won't be enough. They might consider heading south to find safer ground." The old man shook his head bitterly. "Safer ground? The whole realm is on fire. Winter is coming and we have nothing left." Ned's chest tightened. He remembered the vow he had once made, that the wolf protects the pack. These were his people, the North's people, even if not all recognized him. He told the Black Brothers to distribute some of their provisions. They did, though it meant their own rations would be tighter. The relief in the villagers' faces was heartrending and made Ned all the more determined to restore some order to these lands. How many other villages had been ravaged by war, with nowhere to turn? When they departed, the survivors clung together, uncertain of their fate. Ned could only pray the supplies would keep them alive long enough to rebuild or move on. Darkness settled over him as they rowed away, the horizon stretching empty and bleak. More than ever, he felt the weight of duty pressing on him. If the living could not unite to protect the weak among them, how could they ever stand against the army of the dead? They pressed onward into the gloom of late afternoon. The land grew swampier underfoot, the air heavy with the scent of wet earth. They were nearing the outskirts of the neck, that treacherous region of bogs and marshes. The track became slick, the horses picking their way carefully. Ned recalled rumors of House Reed, loyal bannermen to the Starks, who ruled the Crannogmen here. Perhaps they could offer guidance or aid if the travelers stumbled upon them. By twilight, they found a drier patch beneath a cluster of cypress trees. There they camped again. The Black brothers murmured about the burned village, anger simmering in their voices. Sora was quiet, occasionally glancing at Ned with unreadable eyes. After supper, a meager meal of hard bread and water, Ned stepped away from the group, seeking a moment's solitude. He found a half-fallen log near the edge of the marsh and sat upon it, gazing across the still water faintly illuminated by the moon. Frogs croaked and something splashed in the distance. The air smelled of mud and decay, but at least it was quiet. He thought of Sansa again, wondering how she had fared. She had once been so gentle, so eager to please. Now she was forging alliances, possibly raising a banner. The realm had forced her to harden. He prayed it had not broken her heart in the process. A rustle behind him made him turn. Sora emerged from the shadows, arms folded. "Couldn't sleep?" Ned asked softly. She shrugged, stepping closer. "Hard to rest in a bog. Besides, I saw you wander off. Didn't want a crocodile or some southern beast to swallow you before we finish our quest." He allowed himself a slight smile, grateful for her presence. "I was just thinking about my daughter, Sansa. I fear what she's endured." Sora nodded. "No one comes out of war unscathed. But maybe she'll be stronger than you think." She sank onto the log beside him, squinting at the dark water. "I used to wonder if I'd see the green lands south of the wall. Now I'm sitting in a swamp with a resurrected lord. Strange how life turns." Ned chuckled softly. Strange indeed. He studied her face in the dim moonlight, noticing the lines of weariness etched there. "What do you hope to find once this war is over, if it ends?" She shrugged again. "Freedom. Safety, if such a thing exists. My clan was scattered, lost to the others or to the southern knights who call us savages. I'm one of the last. I figure if I live through this, maybe I'll find a place to settle, or maybe I'll wander until the end of my days." Ned felt a pang of sympathy. "That's no easy existence." "No," she agreed quietly. "But it's mine." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the frogs and the distant sloshing of water. Despite the weariness, Ned found a certain peace in the knowledge that he was not alone in this trek. He had sworn to use his second chance for good, to protect. And though his protective circle was small now, Sora, a handful of Black brothers, and soon, hopefully, Sansa, it was a start. Eventually, they rose and returned to the campsite, taking turns on watch. The night passed uneventfully, save for the occasional hiss of some swamp creature in the distance. They broke camp at dawn, the air damp and clinging to them like a cold shroud. The first few hours were slow going, the horses struggling through the muck. Twice, one nearly lost its footing, sending a startled Black brother cursing into the water. Then, as the sun rose higher, they spotted a line of wooden stakes partially submerged in the bog. A faint path stretched beyond, dotted with rickety planks. Sora was the first to notice shapes moving in the distance, figures so well camouflaged that Ned only saw them when they crept closer. Crannogmen. They emerged with spears in hand, faces painted in mottled greens and browns, stepping lightly on hidden causeways as if they weighed no more than birds. The Black brothers tensed, hands on their sword hilts. Ned raised a hand, calling friends. "I am Eddard Stark." The Crannogmen paused, exchanging glances. One stepped forward, a wiry man with reeds braided into his hair. "Eddard Stark is dead," he said softly, his accent lilting. "The rumors say he was beheaded in the south." Ned nodded, well accustomed to repeating this impossible truth. "Those rumors are true, but so is the fact that I was resurrected. I come seeking safe passage to Moat Cailin. I mean no harm to your people." The Crannogman studied Ned's face, then his sword, and finally Sora and the men behind him. "Why should we believe you?" Ned considered, then slowly pulled off his glove, revealing the old scar on his hand from a childhood misadventure at the fortress of Greywater Watch. "When I was a boy, I visited Lord Howland Reed. His daughter was small then. I remember her bright eyes and how she laughed at my accent." He paused, recalling faint details. "I gave her a carved dire wolf, said it would protect her. Ask your lord if he remembers that day and how he taught me to eat frog's legs with a certain sauce your people favor. The Cranagman's expression shifted, surprise flickering. Those are details not many outsiders know. His grip on the spear relaxed a fraction. Still, it could be a trick. Ned inclined his head. I'd expect no less caution. But we truly mean no harm. Tell Lord Reed if you can that Ned Stark has returned, or if he is not near, let us pass so we may reach Moat Cailin to meet my daughter. The man studied him another long moment, then nodded. We will guide you. But any treachery and you will find our spears swift. He signaled to the others who melted into the reeds. Follow carefully. We'll show you a path through the bog that won't swallow your horses. Relief coursed through Ned. He looked back at the Black brothers and Solra. They exchanged cautious nods. Under the Cranagman's guidance, they wound along hidden footpaths, crossing shallow water via stepping stones and rotted boards that Ned would never have dared traverse without local help. The men with painted faces moved gracefully, barely disturbing the reeds, while Ned's party splashed and slipped. Still, they made progress. Frogs croaked in protest, and more than once a low shape vanished beneath the water, some aquatic predator, perhaps. After a few hours, they emerged onto firmer ground, a ridge that rose above the swamp. The largest of the guides turned. Moat Cailin lies a half-day's ride that way. We'll not go further, but we'll watch you from the marshes. Ned inclined his head. Thank you. May the gods keep you safe. The Cranagman only nodded, then melted away with his fellows as silently as ghosts. True to their word, the path ahead remained drier, the bog receding behind them. Trees grew in greater number, and the old ruin of Moat Cailin's towers soon loomed against the horizon. The closer they drew, the more Ned felt his heart hammering. Sansa might be there. Would she recognize him? Would she run to him or recoil in fear? They approached near dusk. The towers, once tall and proud, stood broken, with only 3 still partially intact. The walls had fallen into piles of rubble. A few tents dotted the muddy expanse around the ruin, and Ned saw small fires burning. Soldiers, perhaps 100 or so, bustled about, armed with spears and bows. A crude banner flew over one of the half-standing towers, the direwolf of House Stark, black on gray. Ned halted, nearly overwhelmed by the sight. His house sigil raised again in the north. He dismounted carefully, handing his reins to Garth. The Black brothers fanned out, uncertain. A cry went up from the men in the camp. Swords were drawn, and archers hurried to vantage points on the rubble. Ned raised both hands in peace, stepping forward. I am Ned Stark, he called, voice carrying in the stillness. I've come to speak with Lady Sansa Stark. A tense hush rippled through the camp. Then, from within the largest tower, a cluster of figures emerged. At their center was a tall woman with auburn hair. Sansa. She wore a cloak of thick fur, clasped at her throat by a direwolf pin. Her face was paler than he remembered, the lines more refined, but there was no mistaking his daughter. She stopped short, gazing at him. Her eyes widened with shock and something like fear. For a moment, Ned simply froze, lost in the tumult of emotions. Sansa was alive, changed, grown into a woman. He remembered her as a girl dreaming of knights and songs. Now she stood amid rough soldiers, carrying herself with a quiet dignity that hurt to see. Sansa, he said, softer now. My little girl. She stared as though seeing a ghost. At length, her lips parted. Father. The word caught in her throat. The men around her looked from Ned to Sansa, baffled. Some brandished weapons uncertainly, suspecting a trick. But Sansa took a step forward, her eyes brimming with tears. They said you died. Ned wanted to take her in his arms, but he forced himself to remain still, mindful of all the watchers. I did, he said simply. But I have been returned. I cannot explain why, only that the old gods were not done with me. A sob escaped her, and then Sansa was rushing forward. The soldiers tried to stop her, alarmed, but she brushed past them. Ned met her halfway, gathering her into his arms. He felt her trembling, and his own composure nearly broke. He held her close, inhaling the scent of her hair, different now, tinged with travel and hardship, but still, undeniably, his daughter. He closed his eyes, tears slipping down his cheeks. Sansa clung to him, face buried against his chest. Father, oh gods, it can't be, she kept whispering, voice breaking on the words. This must be a dream or a trick. I'm here, he murmured, stroking her hair. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you. I'm so sorry. She shook her head, tears flowing freely. It was as if years of grief and fear poured out in that moment. Around them, the soldiers lowered their weapons, stunned by the sight. A hush spread across the camp. Some knelt while others simply stared. The Black brothers waited in tense watchfulness, unsure if they would be welcomed or attacked. Solra hung back, arms folded. but her expression held a flicker of empathy. Eventually, Sansa drew back slightly, wiping her cheeks, trying to regain composure before her men. She looked up at Ned, eyes searching. How is this possible? He cupped her face gently, overwhelmed by how much older she looked. I don't know. Only that I woke beyond the wall, somehow alive. Jon can vouch for me. I've been with him at Castle Black. She glanced at his traveling companions, noticing the black cloaks and battered gear of the watch. A slight nod. Jon? Is he well? Ned smiled gently. He is. He's Lord Commander. He sends his love and support. More tears glimmered in Sansa's eyes. She turned to the soldiers. Lower your weapons. This is indeed my father. I know him. Her voice wavered but held authority. The men obeyed, murmuring amongst themselves. A wave of confusion and awe rippled through the camp. Then Sansa motioned to the tower. We must speak inside. There's too much to say. Come, father. He followed her, and the Black brothers and Solra trailed behind, warily accepted by Sansa's forces. Inside the tower, the walls were damp, the floor strewn with rushes, but it was warmer. A makeshift table stood near a small hearth where a fire crackled. As they entered, a tall woman in battered armor bowed to Sansa. Ned recognized her from descriptions. Brienne of Tarth. She surveyed Ned with frank astonishment, but said nothing, only dipping her head respectfully. Nearby stood a handful of northern lords or soldiers. Ned saw the surcoats of House Ryswell, House Mormont, House Locke. They regarded him with wide eyes. Murmurs of Lord Stark rose. Sansa sank onto a wooden chair near the hearth, shaking with the aftermath of emotion. Ned took a seat beside her, leaning forward. You've done so well, he said softly. Raising a host, flying our banner. I'm so proud. Her eyes filled again, but she blinked the tears away, trying to show strength before her subordinates. I only did what I had to. Winterfell was taken by the Boltons, by... Her voice caught. They hurt our family, father, so many times. I escaped only by fortune. The Boltons have fallen since, but the castle was left. It was ruined. Others might be occupying it now. We have limited forces here. We hoped to gather more, to reclaim our home. Ned felt his jaw tighten. We will reclaim it. I promise you. He looked around at the assembled folk. My friends, I know you have no reason to trust the story of my return. But I give you my word. I am Ned Stark, once Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North. We face dark times, darker than any we've known, with the White Walkers looming and winter coming. If we do not unite, we will perish. Let us gather our strength under the Stark banner and prepare. A brief silence. Then a rugged man with a grizzled beard, Lord Wyman Locke, if Ned recalled correctly, stepped forward. My lord, I believed you gone these many years. The North has suffered, fractured. If it is truly you, then we'll answer your call. We have few men left, but they're yours. Others murmured agreement, though the disbelief still lingered in their eyes. Brienne of Tarth lifted her chin. He speaks with the voice of an honorable man. Lady Sansa, you are certain it's him? She nodded firmly. I know my father's face. No impostor could carry those scars or speak with that manner. This is Eddard Stark. Brienne studied Ned, then bowed. Then I'm at your service as well, Lord Stark. My oath is to your daughter. Ned inclined his head, gratitude washing over him. I thank you. You've protected her well, it seems. Brienne said nothing, only clasped the hilt of her sword, acknowledging the praise. Sansa, however, took a shaky breath, regaining her composure. Father, please tell me everything. How you survived. And Jon, Lord Commander. Ned proceeded to recount his journey in hushed tones, leaving out few details. He spoke of waking in the wilderness, meeting Solra, crossing the harsh terrain, reuniting with Jon at Castle Black. The watchers listened, rapt, though some still seemed incredulous. When Ned mentioned the threat of the others, a hush fell heavier still. Sansa pressed a hand to her lips. White Walkers. I heard rumors. We've had no direct encounters yet. Ned's voice hardened. They are real and they are coming. John has seen them, as have countless free folk. Moat Cailin is a strategic point, but we need to secure Winterfell as a base, then send ravens throughout the realm. The living must stand together, or all is lost. Sansa nodded, determination in her eyes. We have begun that process, though with limited resources. The Mormonts have offered some men. The Umbers. Well, some are lost to us, but we might persuade them yet. The Glovers are uncertain, battered by war. The Manderleys might yet come to our side. We only lack the true power to drive out any squatters in Winterfell. She paused, voice softening. But with you here, the old loyalties might be rekindled. Ned squeezed her hand. Then that is what we shall do. Summon them. Let them see me, hear me. If they doubt, we'll show them. A new call to arms, Stark arms, for the good of the North. A murmur of agreement rippled through the gathered lords and soldiers. Ned could almost feel their hopes stirring, fragile but real. He looked around at the battered tower walls, the worn faces. They had suffered, starved, lost loved ones. Yet now they stood on the cusp of something that might unite them again. Sansa rose, leaning on the table for support. We'll begin at once, Father. I have letters prepared, but we can add your seal. That might sway the uncertain lords. Ned nodded. Yes. If we act swiftly, we can gather enough forces to march on Winterfell before the worst of the snows. Then we'll fortify. The real war is still to come, but at least we can face it in our ancestral seat. Her eyes shone with the mix of fear and hope. Yes. Winterfell. She glanced at Brienne. Send word to the captains. We'll host a council at dawn. Brienne bowed. At once, my lady. She turned on her heel and left, the other lords trailing behind to spread the news. That left Ned and Sansa alone by the hearth. Outside, the wind moaned through the broken stones, a reminder of how precarious all this was. Sansa closed her eyes. Father. I'm so afraid, she admitted in a whisper. I've learned how to act strong. But so many have died. Rob, Mother, so many. I can't bear to lose anything more. Ned pulled her into his arms once more, cradling her head. You've borne burdens no child should. You are strong, Sansa. Stronger than you know. We'll face this together now. She allowed herself a moment of vulnerability, trembling against him. I missed you so much. I prayed for you even when they told me it was hopeless. The gods answered in a way I never imagined. He pressed his lips to her brow. Perhaps they heard your prayers. He pulled back gently, gazing into her face. We'll press on. For Rob, for your mother, for Bran and Rickon, for Arya, wherever they are. She nodded, dabbing her tears. For them. Then her features firmed again, adopting that mantle of quiet leadership. We should speak with your companions, make sure they have quarters. And Solra, who is she? Ned half smiled. A friend from beyond the wall. She might not be at ease in a ruin full of kneelers, but she's proven herself. Show her any courtesy you can, for she saved my life. And the Black Brothers are under Jon's command. They've come as an escort. Sansa exhaled. I'll see them treated fairly. This place is no palace, but we can share what little we have. Tomorrow, after the council, we move forward with the summons. By the gods. Father, I'm so glad you're here. Ned cupped her cheek. As am I. Rest if you can. I'll tend to the men. We'll talk more soon. She squeezed his hand, then let him go. It was as though she could hardly bear to let him out of her sight, but duty called. Ned understood he had raised her to be a lady of the North, and here she was fulfilling that role under the direst of circumstances. He left the tower hall and found the Black Brothers outside, discussing watch rotations with Sansa's soldiers. Solra leaned against a half-collapsed wall, arms crossed. She caught Ned's eye. Quite the reunion, she said quietly, though her voice held more gentleness than usual. Yes, Ned agreed, words failing to capture the depth of it. Thank you for helping me get here. Solra shrugged, looking away as though embarrassed. Don't mention it. I'll find somewhere to bed down before the sun sets. She surveyed the camp, noticing the cautious glances the soldiers gave her. Might be wise if I don't stray too far. Ned laid a hand on her shoulder. They'll grow used to you. We're in this together now. You have my protection. She shook her head with a half-smile. I'm not sure who's protecting whom anymore, Stark. He chuckled softly. Fair enough. Darkness fell across the ruin, and torches were lit along the scattered walls. The men from Castle Black shared a small corner of the camp with Solra, wary but safe enough. Ned joined Sansa briefly for an evening meal of salted fish and boiled roots, a meager fare, but welcome. They spoke of practical matters, how many men she had, the conditions of the roads, the possibility of sending outriders to scout. Worry for Arya, Bran, and Rickon lingered in their minds, but with no leads, they could only hope ravens or rumors might guide them eventually. That night, Ned found a bedroll in one of the tower's side chambers, a cramped, drafty space. Despite the day's emotional turbulence, he slept deeply, exhaustion claiming him. His dreams were a mixture of memory and portent, the crypts beneath Winterfell, the statue of himself standing in stony silence, and then a swirl of snow and cold as white shapes loomed beyond. But amid the fear, he dreamt of Sansa's face shining with joy when she recognized him, and that memory gave him solace. When dawn came, the camp stirred, early, men and women going about their tasks with a new vigor. The word had spread, Eddard Stark had returned. Some were still skeptical, but the presence of Sansa's unwavering belief allayed many doubts. The Black brothers found themselves bombarded with questions by the curious soldiers. Ned watched as the men prepared, organizing a council in the large tower hall. He found Sansa already seated at the table, conferring with Brienne and a few northern lords. Her bearing was steady, though Ned could see the nerves in her eyes. She glanced up as he entered, relief passing over her features. He took a seat beside her, placed a hand over hers. They faced the northern lords, Locke, Mormont, Ryswell, and a few others who had trickled in, along with captains of smaller companies, men from scattered corners of the north. Some had battered armor, others none at all. The small hall was crowded with anxious faces. Lord Locke cleared his throat, rising. Lady Sansa has called this council to discuss our course of action. We have learned that Lord Eddard Stark has returned by some grace of the old gods. My lord, I yield the floor to you. All eyes turned to Ned. He rose, feeling the weight of their gaze. Thank you, my lord. Men and women of the north, I stand before you not as a specter or a trick, but as Ned Stark, once your warden and liege lord. We all know the tragedies that have befallen our land. My son Robb led an army to war only to be betrayed. My family was scattered. Many good northern folk died under the Boltons or in battles far from home. Now, our fields are burnt, our villages sacked, and winter presses in. He paused, letting that somber note settle. We have a chance now to unite again. My daughter Sansa has kept the Stark banner flying. If you will stand with us, we can retake Winterfell from any who occupy it and restore some semblance of order. But that is only the first step. Beyond the wall, a greater enemy gathers, the White Walkers, the others. They are real and they are coming. If we do not prepare, all we have suffered will pale beside what they will bring. A ripple of unease spread through the lords. Some exchanged glances, clearly unsure what to make of these old legends come to life. Ned continued. Castle Black stands in their path, commanded by my son Jon Snow. He has seen them himself, fought whites. I ask you all to consider that once we reclaim Winterfell, we must direct our energies not against each other, but against the threat beyond the wall. We call upon every house, great or small, to rally. This is not a war for crowns. It's a war for survival. A silence followed, broken at last by a gruff voice. Aye, but first we must deal with any usurpers in Winterfell. That was Lord Ryswell, tall and hawk-nosed. We've heard rumors that remnants of the Bolton men roam there, or else squatters from the south. If we can't take the castle, we can't unify anything. Sansa straightened. We have perhaps 100 fighting men here, though not all are well armed. With the new arrivals from Castle Black, that number grows a little, but still, we're outmatched if the Boltons or others have entrenched forces. We need the support of every loyal house. Lord Locke nodded. The Umbers might join us, but the last we heard, some of them were entangled with the Boltons. The Manderleys are likely to support a Stark if they believe it's truly Ned Stark returned. House Mormont is already with us in part, but we need more. We need the Glovers, too, if they can be convinced. Ned absorbed this, recalling each house's seat and allegiances. Then let us send ravens in all directions, urging them to gather under the Stark banner. We will ride in person to meet some of them if necessary. Our aim is to muster enough strength that the retaking of Winterfell can be swift and decisive. No more drawn-out battles. We must preserve our men for the true war. There were nods and murmurs. Sansa spoke with quiet authority. I propose we dispatch envoys this very morning. Father, if you will send letters under your seal, that might convince the doubtful. Meanwhile, we secure the neck. Mo Kalen is a natural choke point. If the Boltons attempt to bring in reinforcements from the south, they'll have to pass here. We can fortify it, meager though it is. The council murmured agreement, though some still wore skeptical frowns. Ned reminded himself that these lords had endured countless broken promises and half-truths. Earning their absolute trust would take time. Still, as the meeting progressed, a plan took shape: letters to the major houses, a call to arms, a promise that Eddard Stark himself would greet each lord who answered the summons. Already, Ned could see how a combined force might approach Winterfell from multiple angles, ensuring minimal bloodshed. The real question was how quickly they could move before Winter's grip tightened. When at last the council ended, the lords filed out, each weighed down by the seriousness of the hour. Sansa turned to Ned, voice low. "We'll start drafting the letters now. I have parchment and ink, though little enough. My seal is here, but yours, do you still have your ring?" He shook his head, remembering that it had been taken from him in King's Landing. "I'll make a new signet, or we can craft a suitable seal. It need not be perfect, only recognizable as the Stark dire wolf and my name." She nodded, a faint smile touching her lips. "To think, not long ago I was forging letters to escape King's Landing in desperation. Now I'll write them openly, summoning the North under my father's command. The gods are strange." Ned gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "They are indeed. But we'll make use of whatever blessings they grant us." They spent the rest of the day drafting messages. Sansa's script was neat and elegant, though Ned added lines in his own hand wherever possible, stating plainly that he had returned, naming the old gods as witness. They called for an immediate assembly, urging every loyal northern house to send men or at least respond. By afternoon, a half-dozen ravens were sent to the Umbers, Glovers, Manderleys, Serwins, Tallhearts, and other scattered families. More letters would follow to minor lords and clans. Meanwhile, word of mouth would spread that Eddard Stark was alive. Outside, the camp hummed with activity. Weapons were cleaned, armor repaired, the few workable siege materials inventoried. Ned walked among the men, speaking to them, offering encouragement. More than once, he encountered a soldier who recognized him from years past. "My lord, you likely don't remember me," one man said, eyes shining. "You passed my father's farm once, near the White Knife, and praised our orchard. We never forgot." Ned clasped his hand, voice thick with emotion. "Well met again. I'm glad you survived this war." The stories were heartbreaking. Each man or woman had lost family, land, or hope in the chaos. Yet a spark of belief had lit in them at the return of Ned Stark, even if it was tinged with fear of what unnatural forces might be at work. They needed leadership. They needed stability. In the quiet moments, Ned felt the gravity of it all pressing on him. He was no longer only a father seeking his children. He was once again the head of House Stark, responsible for thousands of lives. The burden was immense, but he had been resurrected for a reason, he was certain. He would bear it. That evening, after the final letters were sent and a watch rotation set, Ned and Sansa shared a modest supper near the hearth in the tower hall. The flicker of flames cast shadows on the cold stone. Sansa wore a cloak of dark gray, reminiscent of her mother's grace, and Ned found himself marveling at how she had grown. They spoke of old times, memories of Winterfell when she was small, of how she used to sing around the castle, how Arya would tease her. Tears glinted in her eyes at the mention of Arya's name. "I wish I knew where she was," Sansa whispered. "She could be anywhere, or gone." Ned reached for her hand. "She's a fighter, Sansa. I have faith she's out there, alive. And we'll not stop searching. One day we'll all stand together in Winterfell's great hall again." Sansa's lips trembled with a fragile smile. "I want to believe that." She paused, glancing around to ensure no one was within earshot. "Father, there are nights I dream about Mother and Robb. It haunts me. Do you dream of them too?" His throat tightened. "Every night. I see them in the crypts or in the courtyard. I hear their voices. It makes me ache for all we've lost." He closed his eyes briefly. "But we must keep going. For their sakes." She nodded, silent tears slipping down her cheeks. Then she composed herself, squaring her shoulders. "Tomorrow, I'll speak with the men about forging alliances with the hill clans. They're tough folk. If they hear you've returned, they might rally. And after that, we wait for replies from the major houses." Ned grimaced at the mention of waiting. Patience had never been harder. Every day counted, with the threat of winter and the others looming. But he saw no alternative. They needed the North behind them to hold Winterfell effectively. "Very well. I'll speak with them too if you wish." She squeezed his hand. "Thank you. I'm learning, step by step. But I'd welcome your guidance." In that moment, Ned saw a flicker of the girl she once was, longing for reassurance. He yearned to give her the safety she deserved, but times were brutal. Still, his presence seemed to buoy her spirits. "You've done so well on your own," he told her gently. "I'm only here to share the load." She bowed her head, a smile ghosting her lips. "I'm so grateful you're here, Father. No matter how it happened." Night wore on, the wind rattling the broken stones. Ned walked the perimeter of the camp with a guard detail ensuring all was secure. In the distance, he thought he heard the mournful cry of a lone wolf echoing across the marshes. It stirred memories of the dire wolves they once found in the snow outside Winterfell. Was that only a handful of years ago? It felt like lifetimes. He returned to the tower where he found Solra perched on a crumbled windowsill peering out into the darkness. She glanced at him. "Quite the fortress you have here," she said dryly. "No roof, half the walls missing, surrounded by stinking bog. You Southerners sure know how to build." Ned exhaled a laugh. "Moat Cailin was once formidable hundreds of years ago." She shrugged. "Still, the men seem to trust you and your daughter. Maybe this ruin can become something again." "That's the hope," Ned said. "We'll use it as a rallying point." Then Winterfell. Solra hummed. "I heard talk of these Boltons you keep mentioning. They sound like fiends." Ned's face hardened. "They are. Or were. They betrayed House Stark. I am told that Ramsay Bolton especially inflicted horrors on countless innocents." He thought of Sansa's unspoken terrors, the dreadful accounts Jon had shared. "They deserve no quarter if any remain." Solra nodded, eyes glinting. "Well, if I see them I won't hesitate." Ned laid a hand on the cold stone, gazing past her at the moonlit swamp. "We must unify the North quickly. Then see to the real war." She studied him. "You truly believe these White Walkers will sweep over everything?" He nodded grimly. "Yes. I felt their presence. Death incarnate, unstoppable unless we stand together. Even that might not be enough." A pause. "But we have to try." A strange seriousness passed over Solra's features. "I've seen their handiwork too. I fear them, but I'll fight. Seems that's all any of us can do." She stretched, hopped down from the windowsill. "Good night, Stark. Or whatever's left of it." "Good night," he replied softly, watching her go. In a flicker of torchlight she vanished down the winding stairs, leaving Ned alone with his thoughts. At length he retired to his chamber, though sleep did not come easily. The next day they began enacting their plans, shaping the disjointed assembly of men into a functioning force, sending out scouts, reinforcing the tumble of Moat Cailin's walls where possible. Ned assisted in drilling some of the raw recruits, imparting simple yet vital lessons on swordsmanship and discipline. The Black brothers pitched in where they could, still uneasy but loyal to Ned and Jon's cause. Solra proved surprisingly adept at teaching stealth techniques, gleaned from her life beyond the wall. Some men scoffed at first, but soon realized her skill was real. Sansa, meanwhile, spent hours consulting with Brienne and the Northern Lords, drafting more letters, building a framework for alliances. She took on the role of hostess to various travelers and messengers who trickled in, wanting to witness the rumored resurrection themselves. Each time, Ned would present himself, speak calmly, show the old scar on his forearm, or mention personal details only the real Ned Stark would know. Gradually, a fragile network of support began to form. Some pledged themselves on the spot, others promised to bring reinforcements once they returned home. Yet as the days stretched on, no major houses arrived in force. Replies came sporadically. House Glover wrote of difficulties, uncertain if they could spare men. The Manderleys remained silent, which worried Sansa. The Umbers were split between small groups that had followed the Boltons and others who might be amenable. Time was not on their side, with the cold deepening each morning. Ned found himself increasingly restless, longing for decisive action. On a particularly cold afternoon, a rider arrived from the north, bearing a missive from Castle Black. He handed it to Ned, shivering in the damp air. Ned opened it with trembling hands, heart pounding as he recognized Jon's handwriting. The message was brief but dire. The others had been sighted farther south than ever before, near a place called Harhome, and hordes of whites were gathering. The free folk were in full flight, seeking any refuge. Jon warned that in a matter of months, if not weeks, the threat could reach the wall in force. Ned felt ice in his veins as he read. He showed the message to Sansa, whose face paled. "They're coming," she whispered. "We haven't the time to gather a grand army. Winterfell won't matter if we're swarmed by the dead." He inhaled, fighting down panic. "We must move faster. If the major houses won't come to us, we'll go to them." His voice carried a grim resolve. "I'll ride for the Manderleys with a small party. You, Sansa, hold Moat Cailin. Keep sending out ravens. If we can persuade House Manderley to lend a large force, that might tip the balance." She shook her head, anxiety in her eyes. "It's dangerous, father. The roads are roamed by bandits and worse. Let me go with you." He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "No, you must remain here to hold the alliance together. If anything happens to me, you are the Stark in the north. But if I succeed, we'll have White Harbor's support, and that is significant. We need ships as well. Jon might need them to evacuate free folk or to transport men to Eastwatch." A flicker of concern crossed her face, but she did not argue further. As you will. Take Brienne at least. She's a loyal shield. Ned nodded. Agreed. Sora will come too, as well as a small detachment of the Black Brothers. We'll move swiftly. And so the next day, amid a swirl of preparation, Ned, Brienne, Sora, and a handful of Black Brothers mounted their horses. Sansa stood by the gate of Moat Cailin, cloak billowing in the wind, face set with anxious determination. Ned bent to kiss her brow. Hold faith, he said softly. We will return with Manderley's men. She clutched his hand. Be safe. With that, the group spurred their mounts, splashing through muddy ground to the more solid road that led east and then north toward White Harbor. If they could secure the city's support, they would gain not only numbers but naval power, something that could be critical in the war against the dead. The journey would take them through lands ravaged by conflict, a region that once was under Bolton influence. But they had no choice. The clock was ticking and the White Walkers drew closer with each passing day. They made good time the first 3 days, skirting the edges of thick forest, crossing rivers swollen with autumn rains. Brienne rode beside Ned, ever watchful, her posture radiating unwavering dedication. Sora scouted ahead, with Garth and Lothar, Black Brothers who had proven competent, on the road. At night, they camped in abandoned farmsteads or small, hidden glades, always posting double watch. On the 4th day, they reached a crossroads where signposts had been torn down. Sora circled back, reporting signs of fresh hoofprints leading north. Ned felt a flicker of unease. We're not alone on this road, he muttered to Brienne. Could be friend or foe. As dusk fell, the group found a crumbling roadside inn, half-burned. The roof was missing over one wing, but the main common room still had part of its structure. They decided to shelter there. The wind was fierce and the horses needed rest. Inside, broken tables lay scattered, ash coating the floor from whatever fire had gutted the place. Still, it offered some protection from the elements. They barred the door and set about making a small fire in the hearth. While the Black Brothers tended to the horses in a makeshift stable out back, Ned searched the common room, noticing empty wine casks, shattered crockery, and scorched rafters. The smell of smoke and decay lingered. Brienne joined him, keeping a hand near her sword hilt. It's quiet, she remarked, voice echoing slightly in the ruin. Too quiet. Ned nodded. The entire region felt devoid of life, as though the war had driven out all but the desperate. Still, we'll keep watches. Eat, rest, move on at first light. Sora ducked inside, shaking the drizzle from her cloak. Horses are settled. Lothar's up on the roof, says the vantage is decent. We might spot trouble coming. Or so we hope. She paused, giving Ned a sidelong glance. You look tired, Stark. He let out a weary breath. I am. The body may be resurrected, but it still needs rest. She smirked but refrained from her usual jibes. Perhaps she sensed the tension in the air. Get some sleep. I'll take second watch with Brienne. Ned inclined his head, appreciating her concern. He and Brienne then arranged the watch schedule. Garth would take first watch at the door, Sora and Brienne the second, Ned and Lothar the last. With that settled, he found a corner free of debris, unrolled his cloak, and let exhaustion claim him. His dreams that night were fractured. He saw the White Harbor docks, bustling with ships bearing Stark banners. Then he saw a swirling blizzard, pale figures gliding over ice, unstoppable. He dreamt of Arya standing before him, face hidden by a mask, calling his name. It all blended into a restless haze until a hand on his shoulder shook him awake. He started, reaching for his sword. It was Sora, her eyes narrowed. Up, Stark? It's your watch. He blinked, disoriented by the gloom. The fire in the hearth had died to embers, casting faint orange light. Rising stiffly, he belted on his sword and followed her to the door where Lothar waited. Garth, apparently, had gone to snatch some sleep. Outside, the wind whistled through the broken timbers. The night was moonless, the black sky thick with rolling clouds. Ned nodded to Sora. All quiet. She shrugged. For now. Then she jerked her head toward the stable. Go out and circle. I'll hold the door. Something's off tonight. He sensed it too, a prickling at the back of his neck. Agreed. With a final glance, he pushed open the sagging door, stepping onto the rubble-strewn porch. The wind tugged at his cloak. He moved quietly around the side of the inn where the stable was little more than a roofed enclosure missing 2 walls. The horses stood within, stamping nervously. Ned patted one's flank, murmuring a soothing word, scanning the darkness. Then a faint sound, hooves on the road. He stiffened, slipping into the shadow of the stable. The night was black, but he thought he saw shapes moving, several riders approaching the inn, outlines barrel. Why discernible? They halted some distance away as though scouting. Ned's heart hammered. friend or foe? He considered warning the others immediately, but curiosity drove him to creep closer, inching along the stable's exterior. The gloom was near impenetrable, but he heard the low murmur of voices, a man barking an order. Then a flicker of torchlight flared, revealing half a dozen riders. Their gear looked mismatched, bits of chainmail, old surcoats. He caught a glimpse of a flayed man's sigil on one man's pauldron. Bolton. Tension coiled in his chest. Bolton men, or outlaws wearing Bolton spoils. Either way, trouble. They advanced slowly, the torch revealing the front of the inn. Ned heard one say, "Looks abandoned. Might find shelter or plunder inside." Another replied, "We'll kill anyone we find and take the horses. Lord Bolton's gone, but his men are not done hunting." Ned's mind raced. They were outnumbered. He had Brienne, Solra, Garth, Lothar, and 2 more black brothers inside. 7 against 6 might not be bad odds, but the Bolton men might have reinforcements. He retreated quietly, returning to the inn's entrance. Solra stiffened as soon as she saw his expression. "Trouble. Bolton men," Ned whispered. "Or bandits using Bolton insignia. 6 riders, at least, armed, approaching from the road." She set her jaw. "We'll rouse the others. We can't let them surprise us." They slipped inside, quickly alerting Brienne, Garth, and the rest. Weapons were drawn in hushed urgency. Brienne moved to guard one window, Solra took another, while the black brothers positioned themselves behind overturned tables. Ned stationed himself near the door. He felt his pulse hammering, an odd clarity settling over him. He remembered the last time he truly fought for his life, outside of fleeting recollections. It had been in the chaos before his capture in King's Landing, or perhaps earlier still. Now death hovered close again. How ironic for a resurrected man to face another mortal fight. He tightened his grip on the longsword's hilt. Outside, horses snorted. A man's voice called mockingly, "Ho in the inn! We know you're there. Show yourselves or we'll burn you out." Another chimed in with a cruel laugh. Ned ground his teeth. They were confident. If they set the inn alight, they'd have the advantage. He turned to Brienne, voice low. "We can't let them fire the building." She nodded, hefting her shield. "Then we take the fight to them." Before Ned could respond, Solra hissed from her vantage. "They're spreading out. A few heading for the stables." Ned's blood ran cold. The horses would be lost if they reached them. He made a quick decision. "Solra, Garth, come with me to the stable side. Brienne, hold the door with the others. Don't let them inside. If we can flank them, we might catch them by surprise." A grim set of nods. Ned and his small group slipped out a side gap, crouching behind debris. The torchlight flickered near the stable. One bandit rummaged among the hay, cursing. Another held the torch, scanning the darkness. Ned exchanged a glance with Solra, who drew a short blade with a feral grin. They crept forward in silence. Garth went first, blade raised. He dispatched the torchbearer with a swift slash to the neck. The man toppled without a cry, blood spraying the straw. The second bandit spun, only to face Ned's sword point. Ned lunged, remembering his old training, burying the blade in the bandit's chest. He felt the jolt up his arm as the man collapsed with a wet gasp. A third bandit rushed around the corner, shouting in alarm. Solra met him with a savage slash, forcing him back. He stumbled, took a wild swing at her. She ducked, grabbed his arm, and drove her dagger into his ribs. He gurgled and dropped. Blood darkened the hay. The horses reared in panic, whinnying. Shouts erupted from the front of the inn. Ned looked up in time to see flickers of steel and orange glow as another torch was thrown. It landed on the half-burned timbers, starting a small flame. "No," he roared. Garth rushed to stamp it out with his foot, but the old wood caught easily. A swirl of sparks shot upward. From the front, Brienne's voice boomed, "For the Starks." Steel clashed on steel. Clearly, the others were engaged in battle. Ned vaulted over the stable rail, sprinting toward the corner to get a line of sight. In the gloom, he glimpsed Brienne's tall form holding the doorway, her sword bashing aside an attacker's strike. Another black brother was down, an arrow protruding from his shoulder. The bandits pressed in. Ned roared a challenge, charging from the side. One bandit turned in surprise as Ned's blade bit into his side. The man shrieked, dropping his axe. Another tried to ride Ned down on horseback, but the horse, spooked by flames and chaos, refused to charge. Ned seized the moment, slashing upward to unseat the rider. The man tumbled to the ground with a heavy thud. A swirl of movement to his left, a bandit lunged, brandishing a sword with a cruel hook. Ned twisted aside, parrying the blow. Their blades locked in a shriek of metal. The bandit sneered, "You fight well, old man." Ned shoved him back, heart pounding. Not so old as to forget how, he growled, stepping in to deliver a swift cut across the bandit's chest. Blood sprayed. The man collapsed. Flames crackled higher now, lighting the scene in flickering orange. Ned saw Brienne batter a mace-wielding foe to the ground with her shield, then run him through with a brutal efficiency. Solra emerged from the side, slicing at the hamstrings of a fleeing bandit who yowled and fell. Another black brother pinned the last bandit with a spear thrust. Soon, the night fell silent but for the crackle of fire and the groans of the wounded. The bandits lay sprawled, half of them dead, the rest bleeding out on the muddy ground. One tried to crawl away, but Garth slammed a boot on his back, pressing him down. Brienne panted, scanning for more foes. "That's the lot of them," she hissed. Ned hurried to the black brother who'd been shot in the shoulder. The man was pale, teeth clenched in pain. Ned snapped the arrow shaft and eased it out, calling for bandages. Solra produced some from her pouch, binding the wound as best they could. He'd live if infection didn't claim him. They stamped out the flames that threatened the building, though the stable was beyond salvage. The old timbers collapsed in a shower of sparks, and the terrified horses bolted. In the aftermath, Ned stared at the carnage, bodies strewn around the inn yard, thick smoke drifting. His heart sank. This was but one skirmish in a land ravaged by war. They had lost a horse or two, had a man wounded, but had survived. The bandits, Bolton men, or ex-Bolton men, were no more. Brienne turned to Ned, brow furrowed. "Are you hurt?" He wiped blood from his cheek, checking his limbs. "No. I'm fine." He glanced at the black brother with the arrow wound. "But we'll need to slow our pace. We can't leave him behind, and we lost some horses." He exhaled, pressing a hand to his forehead. "We'll have to make do. If more of them lurk nearby, we're in danger." Solra spat in the mud. "We should get as far from here as we can by daylight. These bastards might have friends." Ned agreed. He gazed at the swirling embers, feeling a bitterness in his gut. How many more battles? How many more widows and orphans would be left in the wake? All to reach White Harbor for a chance at uniting the North. But there was no turning back. The White Walkers would not wait. They gathered the living, searching the dead for supplies. The bandits carried some dried meat, a few tarnished coins. Nothing of great value. They found a surviving horse or two, enough to remount most of their party. The one black brother would have to ride double. The wounded man was stabilized, but in no condition for a fight. At dawn, exhausted and smeared with soot, they left the blackened ruin behind, continuing north. The following days were grueling. The air grew colder, the roads emptier. They crossed farmland left fallow, saw glimpses of scattered families fleeing in wagons, distrustful of any armed band. More than once, they found evidence of further skirmishes, blood-stained tracks, burned homesteads. The war's legacy lingered, and the northern lord's hold was tenuous. Ned pressed them onward, though guilt gnawed at him for the black brother's wound. The man bore it bravely, teeth gritted against pain, but it slowed them. At last, late on the 8th day since leaving Moat Cailin, they crested a ridge and spotted the White Knife River glittering in the distance. The walled city of White Harbor spread along the bank, its harbor cradled by gray waters. Ships bobbed at anchor, some with battered sails, others bearing foreign insignia. Over the city rose the imposing fortress known as the New Castle, seat of House Manderley. Ned's heart stirred with hope. If the Manderleys were still the loyal clan he remembered, their support might shift the entire north. They approached cautiously, well aware that White Harbor had changed hands multiple times during the war. At the city gates, the guards eyed them warily. Ned dismounted, stepping forward. "I am Eddard Stark. I come in peace to speak with Lord Wyman Manderley." The guards exchanged looks, then burst out laughing. "Eddard Stark is dead," one said, spitting to the side. Ned felt that familiar pang. He slowly reached for the letter Sansa had penned with his own signature. "I have a message for Lord Manderley bearing the Stark seal. Give it to him and let him judge." The guards scowled, uncertain. One stared at Brienne's imposing figure and Solra's predatory stance, and the black brothers behind them, battered but armed. Reluctantly, he said, "Fine. Stay here, and we'll send word." So they waited outside the gates, the cold wind biting as the guard hurried inside with the letter. Ned prayed that Wyman Manderley still lived. Rumor had it he had faced the Lannisters, the Boltons, and had endured much. If he had turned, or if someone else now ruled White Harbor, this journey might be in vain. An hour passed and the guard returned with an escort of soldiers wearing the merman sigil. "Come," the guard said grudgingly. "Lord Wyman invites you to the new castle. But mind yourselves any treachery and you'll hang." Ned nodded, leading his weary party into the city. As they rode through the streets, townsfolk gawked. Word spread quickly that someone claiming to be Ned Stark had arrived. Ned saw fear and curiosity etched on the people's faces. White Harbor had grown more crowded with refugees, it seemed. Tents lined the walls as families sought shelter from the chaos in the interior. The smell of fish and brine permeated the air. Boats with patched sails filled the harbor, some returning from the sea with paltry catches. They passed through a second gate into the outer courtyard of the new castle. Guardsmen formed ranks, spears upright. Ned and his companions dismounted, leading the horses forward. A steward beckoned, leading them up broad stone steps and into a pillared hall. Rich tapestries depicting maritime scenes adorned the walls, but everything carried a subdued air, as though overshadowed by hardship. At the far end of the hall, seated on a cushioned chair, was Lord Wyman Manderley, his immense girth unmistakable even after years of rumored famine and stress. His face was lined with age, his beard whiter than Ned recalled, but his eyes were sharp as ever. Flanking him were knights in mail, and behind, a few robed attendants. The hall was strangely quiet. Ned stepped forward, heart-pounding. Wyman Manderley eyed him with a mixture of astonishment and deep suspicion. "They say you are Ned Stark," Lord Manderley rumbled, voice echoing in the cavernous space. "Yet I saw Ned Stark's head on a spike in King's Landing." Ned forced calm, bowing his head with respect. "I was executed, my lord. But by the grace of the old gods I have returned. I can offer no better proof than myself. Look into my face. Listen to my words. I ask for your aid to save the North and indeed all the realm." A murmur swept the hall. Wyman squinted, leaning forward. "Gods be good. You have his look, his voice." He turned to an attendant who nodded as though confirming they had read the letter bearing the Stark seal. Then Wyman faced Ned again. "If you were truly Eddard Stark, tell me something only he would know." Ned exhaled. "When my sister Lyanna died, I returned from the war. You met me at White Harbor when I arrived by ship. You gave me fresh clothes, for mine were soaked in blood and salt. You pressed upon me a fish pie I could barely eat, so deep was my grief. We spoke of how you feared for your own daughter's future should the war continue." Ned paused, letting that memory flow. "Afterwards, you gave me a ring, saying it was an old Manderley heirloom meant to strengthen the bond between our houses. I gave it to my wife, Caitlin. She wore it until the day of her death." A hush gripped the hall. Tears glistened in Wyman's eyes. "That ring was lost at the Red Wedding, they say." "Gods have mercy." He stood, trembling with emotion, and lumbered forward. "Eddard, by the gods, it is you. Or some ghost wearing your face." Ned met him halfway, clasping his hands. "No ghost, my lord, though I can scarce explain it. But I'm here, and I beg you, the North needs you." Wyman swallowed hard, tears running into his beard. "If the old gods have returned you, I will not question it further. The Manderleys are with you, now and always. I've waited for a Stark to rise again. Tell me what must be done." Ned felt a rush of gratitude so intense it nearly overwhelmed him. He gripped Wyman's hands more tightly. "We must gather an army. We must retake Winterfell swiftly. Then we must prepare to face a threat unlike any we've known. The White Walkers march and we need every sword." Wyman nodded, gaze firm. "Then you shall have our swords and our ships. Whatever remains of our strength is yours." He paused, turning to address the hall. "Summon my captains. Call the banners. Let it be known, Lord Eddard Stark has returned." A roar rose from the assembled knights and attendants. Brienne exhaled relief, Solra watched with narrowed eyes, and the Black brothers exchanged hopeful glances. Ned felt his chest fill with something like triumph, tempered by urgency. They had secured Manderley's alliance, and that was no small thing. But the clock was ticking. Would it be enough? He thought of Sansa waiting in Moat Cailin, of Jon at the wall, bracing for the onslaught of the dead. All they could do was press on, forging alliances, uniting the North under Stark leadership once more. The final war was yet to come. That night, as Wyman Manderley hosted a sparse feast for Ned in the high-ceilinged dining hall, Ned felt a solemn sense of purpose settle over him. He was no longer the broken man who had awakened alone beyond the wall. He had a role to play in the living's last stand against the darkness. It would be a perilous road, filled with battles and heartbreak, but he was determined not to fail again. This time, he would stand with his family, with the North, until the bitter end, whatever that end might be. And as he gazed at the flickering torches along the walls, he could almost feel the gaze of the old gods upon him, ancient and watchful. He had been spared death's grasp once. Now he would use that gift to keep the North alive. The long night loomed, but Eddard Stark stood ready to fight.